the enduring relationships between the Indigenous peoples and the territories they have traditionally occupied. We recognize and deeply appreciate the historic connection they have to this place, the land, the water, the air, and all that live on, in, and above it. We're grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of Indigenous peoples who have taken care of these lands and who continue to care for them. And we want to show our respect. Hundreds of years after the first treaties were signed, they remain relevant today. May they guide our actions and our decisions. We commit to learn, to educate, to honor sacred places, and to take action towards real truth and reconciliation. Miigwech. Council, any declarations of pecuniary interest or conflict of interest? Everybody's shaking their heads. Clerk, any open forum candidates today or applicants? Well then, I have moved by Councillor Jarvis, seconded by Councillor Bocek. Do I see Councillor Bocek? Oh, there you are. Sorry, sir. Be it resolved, the council adopts the regular agenda of November 15th, 2023 as circulated. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. And now we have our single item on the agenda, the staff report with regards to the 2024 budget draft number 1. Ms. Boutiette, you're going to lead off the conversation?
I sure am. And I'm going to share my screen. Good morning, Council, and through your worship, we are going to discuss the draft number 1 of the budget today, and I am going to skip over the report and go straight into the prepared presentation. And I'm going to lean on all of my colleagues to discuss when we get to their specific budget. So the draft 1, I'm going to start with a very high level summary before we take a deep dive. This is a comparison between last year and where we are at currently for draft 1. Again, this is a draft. This is not a final budget, and council has the authority and the will to change, modify, and so on, and any part of the budget that they choose. So I just wanted to show that last year, even though the lower tier, which is the Township of Georgian Bay's portion, was a 13.9% increase, that the overall was about 5.67. In comparison to this year, we are a bit lower right from the get-go on draft 1. And also, the district has just released this week their draft 1, and they're landing at a 5.96, which is a little bit higher than last year. And assuming the province does not modify their levy at 0%, we could land somewhere around 6.57 overall. That's keeping all the assumptions the same. 6.57.
Can we interrupt as we see fit?
Pardon?
Could we interrupt as we see fit?
Yes, absolutely. That would be optimal.
Just curious, what about school taxes?
Yeah, so that's the education rate. So it didn't increase last year, and we hope that it won't increase again this year. We don't get notice of that till about March of the in-year.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I can't know for sure, but the word on the street is that it won't increase again this year.
Thank you.
So by object, so we flipped it around and did by object first this year. And council often wanted to know what is the sum of the different types of expenditures or revenues. So huge increase in the capital levy, which is in line with our asset management plan. Also a huge increase in user fees and charges, and we will explain that as we go. And the transfers to reserves have decreased. On the expense side, we see an increase in salaries, wages, and benefits. And if I may jump the gun right now, the increase is offset by a decrease in contracted services and also is responsible for that increase in user fees revenues. So those are offsets. And the donation municipal grants is also a significant increase. So again, at a very high level, there are a lot of little pluses and minuses that I didn't list on this list. So these are major changes that are not offset or revenue neutral. So this you could see where we've obtained our 11.47% increase. And I also put at the bottom there a little bit of data on our current consumer price index and the construction price index.
Curious, Julie, gas and diesel, is that due just the increase in price of gas and diesel, or is that an increased consumption?
Mostly price, but if my colleague would like to.
In large part, I guess all of it is the price and excuse me, the price increase. What we use year to year varies a little bit, but the increase that we're asking for is as a result of the increases prices we're seeing when we purchase the fuel.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. For just a quick second, the question on the public library increase. I think on this page, the increase is listed as 145-ish thousand. And in other parts of your report and that we've been presented from the library, their increase is $496,000. Do you know, like, why on this page are you saying 145?
496 is the entire contribution they're requesting. This is the increase from prior year.
I thought 496. Oh, the increase of okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Just to make it official, I think we'll treat this as a, let me call it a cow-like session. Let people interrupt as they see fit until they dominate the conversation. We'll say, then we'll let somebody else take a turn. But otherwise, I think just keep on going the way Councillors Jarvis and Predko have let us off. Thank you.
Okay, now we're diving in. So general governance, I'm going to define it a little bit here. So general governance is really the catch-all of what doesn't fit under the leadership of a certain department. For example, line 4 is government transfers and grants. This is our OMPF funding and also our OSIF funding. So both of those are of general nature. They're not really assigned. They're used really as an overall grant for the entire township. And I will stop at that point because we just received our allocation notice and the forecast for draft 1 of 2024 is already too high. Our OMPF allocation is being reduced by about 11,500. So that number is going down by 11,500 in draft 2.
So, and which item is that, Julie?
It is line 4 on this page.
Line 4, okay. Oh, wow.
Other major changes are Interest income, we've adjusted upwards of 200,000 because we collected a lot more than 150,000, and the bounce back of the market in subsequent to COVID has said that an additional 200,000 is reasonable.
And where's that fit on this? What item is that? Line?
Line 6.
Other revenues. Okay. Julie, in the reduction in transfers from reserve, that's arbitrary, right? Or is
Yes.
that meant? Yeah.
Julie, quick question.
Yes.
Is there any way you can increase the size of this? I've got my nose right up to the screen. Thank
Absolutely.
you. That helps.
Is that better or more?
Well, no, that's better for sure, but you're not filling the page in my computer anyway. That's better. Thank you.
Stop looking at your phone and look at your computer.
So Julie, if I may, the transfer from reserve, so we're suggesting it's going down, less money transferred into reserves. Last year, if my memory serves me correctly, we had a little panic attack that our reserve portfolio was not being managed at the level that it needed to be. Can you give us some comfort level on how the reserves are and how we stack up for kind of a small municipality and what we should have in reserves?
I will repeat what I said last year. There's no key number of the proper amount to have in reserves. Our general operating reserves is about 3.4 million. We anticipate to draw from that about 90 to 100,000 at the end of 2023. I still believe it's a reasonable amount to have in the operating reserves, and I'm not talking specifically about all of our infrastructure reserves that we have. I could open my financial statements to know the sum of that, but it is adequate for where we are in time. However, should the province completely stop subsidizing infrastructure, we would not be in a position where we have full replacement value equivalent to where we are at in time as of 2023.
Question, if I may, on that transfer from reserves, you had 475 from the budget last year and 0. And then yesterday you suggested it was going to be some, and just now it's going to be somewhere in the 90s.
Yeah, 90 to 100,000
so
is going to be the.
So this isn't quite correct when it says 0.
No, correct. Yep.
Thank you.
Did not put the forecasted out number in there, and I should have. And the difference of the 75,000 reduction is actually last year there was a direct request that we fund a recruiter directly from reserves of 75,000. We did not use it and don't believe we will need it next year as well.
So then, just dwelling on that for a moment, if our actual transfer from reserve for 23 is somewhere around $100,000, why are we forecasting 400,000 for 24?
Because of all the increases during the year, and again, a budget is a budget, and we don't know what exactly will happen. There could be savings because there is less snow, or there could be savings because there are more vacancies than our vacancy allowance, which we will get to discuss very shortly.
And Julie, while we're on this line, if we choose to remove the reserve for the recruiter, that money goes back into reserve?
It was not drawn from reserves,
Okay.
so it just remains status quo.
Okay, thank you.
And then while we're on it, contribution to capital, that's contribution to capital reserve, or just clarify that for me?
The contribution to capital is both capital purchases and capital reserves put in or drawn from. We will be coming back with a capital report very shortly, but really the contribution to capital is directly drawn from our asset management plan.
Okay.
going back to reserves, I made the 400,000. I mean, every year for as long as I can remember, including before I was in elected office, we've put an amount in reserves. And it seems to me every single year we have not used most of that amount. So it's just been conservative.
Correct?
Yeah,
And we've been adjusting the budget a lot closer to actuals. So last year in 23, council's aware that it was the first year we actually did a vacancy or an attrition allowance. That was new to us. Usually our savings are drawn from vacancies during the year. So you'll see very shortly, and I could actually go back up. We've seen the salaries in the by object. We're going to land very close to where we projected to land because of that attrition allowance. So now that we're adjusting our budgeting to reflect actuals, it is like before 2023, we actually never drawn from that budgeted reserves. We're going to draw from it for the first time in 23. So I think our budgeting skills are getting better, and we're at some point, the prudent thing to do would be to stop drawing from reserves, but until we adjust that budget to perfection, which is almost impossible, that's kind of, you know, where the balancing number is.
seems rather prudent to have it.
If we budget to perfection, we wouldn't need councils half their resolutions that are spending money because we would have had all predicted perfectly in advance.
Would you like me to go back and talk about the salaries and budget by object? But we will get there also lastly. So,
if I can, sorry, if I can just jump in, and I just want to hit the message home about the Ontario Municipal Partnership funding. So this will gradually reduce every year, and obviously it's a significant amount of money that the township has been receiving. But this year it's gone down by 11,000, so that's just over 1% of the $1 million. And obviously, in real terms, when you factor in CPI, that affects us more. And this is only going to progressively reduce that pot of money. So we do have to start thinking about, and the double whammy is the fact that there continues to be more downloading from the province. When you look at the multitude of changes in the Planning Act, for example, that we're having to staff up to try and manage. So it's a double pressure there from that respect. There's more downloading, and we have to then, as a lower tier, have to fund that gap.
That's because the province has figured out they're more in debt than most municipalities in the province, so they're going to start putting the municipalities further in debt.
Further in debt, yet won't allow a deficient budget.
Yeah, we have to have a balanced budget, unlike them, but they go farther and farther in debt, so they're just going to keep on downloading. I think regardless of your political stripe, that's a momentum that our single taxpayer, our taxpayer who pays all levels of government, is going to find that they're paying more at the lower level and more at the upper level. And let's not go into the fiscal management of the upper levels at this point, because we want to get this meeting on our focus on us. But I think that is a fiscal reality of municipalities going forward. The downloading is just going to continue.
On line 8, there's also a 200,000 increase, and that is municipal accommodation tax, and I will pass it along to our CAO to discuss that.
Thank you, Judy. Yes, so obviously council would have to ratify this and approve it. So this number here is very conservative. It just includes a certain percentage of the short-term rentals that are being advertised right now. The number does not include any commercial establishments such as hotels or motels at this point, unless council would also like to introduce that a MAT tax for those operations as well. And that is based on roughly 2/3 of what we believe we should be able to achieve in the short-term rental market alone, not including commercial establishments. And that's at a 2% rate. So again, very conservative compared to what the typical MAT tax rate is, which would be at 4%. So that fee there, although that additional revenue, if you like, would more than cover the conversion of a seasonal bylaw enforcement officer to a full-time bylaw enforcement officer, which was discussed earlier in the year and that council has approved.
So I'll let the mayor speak.
So this would be on top of the, I'll call it registration fee?
Correct, yes, yes.
So my concern would be we haven't reviewed or approved a motion or a bylaw for that. Is it prudent to have that revenue in the budget for next year when we don't really know that that's the direction that we will ultimately take?
That is
Julie, you've also captured the expense side of that topic. So we've sort of balanced things out, and I would say there's a reasonable probability that will be approved. So for the purposes of discussion, I would say let's leave it in because it gives us a potential good future picture. Because we're not approving this today. We're going to go through at least, one or two more reviews of it. So I like the fact that we've got a complete picture of what we are likely going to have, because after our December meeting, we'll know for sure whether or not we've got the SDR program in place or not.
Fair enough.
I can move on from that subject. You will see a lot of the comments are talking about insurance reallocations. We dug into the formula of insurance. Overall, there's a $58,000 increase in insurance, but you'll see some departments get hit higher than others because we actually rejigged the formula to reflect better based on the 2023 expenditure budgets where the insurance should go on the general liability side, and on the fleet and facility side we actually put the expenditures where they belong versus an arbitrary allocation. So you'll see that shows up a lot in the explanations, but overall insurance is up 50%, uncontrollable at this time.
And where is it on this page?
It hits all of the contracted services line.
Thank you. Oh, got it.
On the contribution to capital, this is the 16.27% increase, which 14.87 comes from our asset management plan annually that was approved in early 2022, and also our new capital items which were approved through the 23-24 capital budget. Any other questions in general governance? Okay. So these are the notes that I've discussed. Oh, I forgot to mention that the water quality testing, because it's becoming a staff-led initiative, has been moved out of this general fund into environmental.
Do you mind if I just simply object to the title of donations? Because it almost sounds like we're, like giving money away versus investing in services in our community. I mean, I know I'm being really picky here, and that's a word, and we're talking numbers, but it just seems like a weird word.
If council wants to give me different wordage, I'm happy to update it for draft 2.
I'll think about it.
I'll just write on my notes, new wordage from mayor. I'll follow up later.
To me, a donation is like a voluntary contribution to, like, we ask people to make donations to our food bank. But for us, when the food bank appears here, I consider it an expense, not a donation. And I think the same way about the library. And I personally think the library should have a separate line from everything else because it's becoming a very significant investment.
It actually could, I think the wordage that I was referring to were municipal board organizations, which are the SSEA and the library.
Okay.
They hold their own board.
Yeah, and I don't consider those donations personally.
Yeah, I agree with the mayor. No, donation is not the appropriate word.
Sure.
Municipal board funding.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Now we're ready to approve the budget. We got the right word in. Let's go.
If I may also add a quick comment about the contribution to capital, and it does seem like a lot, and council can choose to modify that amount, although I don't recommend that per the asset management plan. However, at this rate, I know Ms. Bouthelette said that earlier, that we're not quite there yet to fund all of our assets. The fact is that that number is there so that over the course of the next 7 or 8 years, when we hit the year 10, at this rate, we will be able to maintain all of the assets that we currently have. The next step would be to say, okay, if we do a core services review, theoretically, do we want to maintain all the existing assets that we have, or reduce them, or even increase? That will then affect the amount of money that would be required for the capital component. But this number gets us on the right track to where we want to be by the end of the next 8 years, 7 years, I think. So yeah.
I have a question. So if it's capital projects, I'm assuming that's includes the accruals for the capital projects that we've got, such as the Port of Honey Harbor and others. Is that true?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so I know I'm diving a little bit into the weeds here, but yesterday we had a topic that came up, and I wanted to ask the question then, but it's really more financial. And the question is, what are we accruing for the Port Severn Park?
I don't have the details of that right now, but I could definitely drill that up.
So you need to give me a number. What I'm really focused on here is, are we doing a full accrual for the Port Severn Park like we are for the Port of Honey Harbor and other things? And
Yes.
And I think one of the topics of discussion yesterday was, what are the revenues coming out of the Port Severn Park through the parking, etc. And we, I think, need to understand in balance, what is our capital accrual on that park and that investment, because that gives us then the full picture. And yesterday we did not have the full picture.
And I must put a little bracket there. The revenues generated by the parking in Port Severn Park are considered operational. I didn't see any motion anywhere that said, all the parking revenues should be offset to a capital reserve or anything of that sort. If that's the case, that could be changed. And I must also state that what we consider the Port Severn Park is more than just the parking. It's also that building that's in there, and also the splash pad and all of the other, beautification objects and landscaping that are part of the Port Severn Park.
Right. And I think going forward, I think what we need to be doing is, when we have a project like the Port Severn Park, and the parking is enabling the park to exist, if you will, and the use of the park. So I think we need to have an ability to look at the project in a totality. And so the parking is in fact offsetting the capital reserves that are required to maintain the park going forward. And I think that park and every other capital investment that we should have that full picture in front of us. And I do very much appreciate your helping us understand that Today we have revenue in operations versus capital accruals. But I think we as councillors, as we are trying to make good decisions for the township, need to have the full picture in front of us. And if that means understanding that the parking fees, for example, at the Prince Edward Park are really predominantly to offset the accruals, I suspect that the accrual is going to exceed the parking revenue. But we walked away yesterday thinking that we were at about a 20K freebie from the park, and I think that tells us and our residents the wrong message. Thank you. Don't need the details now. I just wanted us to understand those things that weren't clear to me yesterday, but as you're providing this information today, it kind of, I'm connecting some dots that that I didn't connect before, but I think we as councillors and as a council need to understand and connect those dots going forward.
Just to put a side discussion to that, yes, we could put the parking revenues against capital. However, any or any other revenues against any infrastructure. However, there is an operational component to that as well, which is the enforcement aspect, the maintenance and repair aspect. So you're taking from one side to feed the other, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I'm not trying to arbitrarily push one set of numbers in one place versus the other. I think what we need to do is have a complete picture. And Greg, you just offered another element of that project, that asset that has numbers associated with it. And yesterday, I think we had a half window of that particular scenario. And how do we make good decisions unless we have a whole picture? And that's really what I'm asking for.
One other question on capital reserves. The Sustainability Committee is reviewing all of the facilities with regards to making them more net zero. Is any of that built into our capital reserves right now, or is that something that we're going to have a discussion on, since a lot of those, if any of those projects go forward, that's going to have an impact on how we fund them?
So because our contribution to capital is a bucket that is tied to our asset management plan. Our asset management plan back in 2022, which is based on 2020, already getting a bit old, did not have a lot of facility data. So we kind of have a bucket put aside for facility improvements, rehabilitation, and that bucket has not been allocated. So those specific things will come back to council for decisions. So I wouldn't think that at this point that would be any new money that we would be required. We would draw from the reserves and then rebuild those reserves as time goes on through our capital levy.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm moving on to page 8, which is council. We learned yesterday that we need to increase the Honeybee Festival budget by $10,000, so that is not included in this draft. And there's also a discussion to add X amount of dollars for provisions and local accommodations. So those are the two topics of the discussion on this budget.
And what line would they go into?
Both of those would be hitting line 29 of contracted services.
Well, and yesterday we did approve the 10,000 for the Honeybee, and there was a general discussion about 6,000 of additional, I'll call it council expenses, to cover accommodation and meals for on a couple of occasions during the winter.
And if I could, we have an outstanding topic that staff have not brought back to council, and that is the topic of covering commute costs for counselors coming in from long distances. And I'm not sure that that would offset or be more than the overnight accommodation meal thing, but we may want to just put a plug number in there as a buffer, if you will, so that when that matter comes back, we're not then looking for how do we fund it, how do we budget for it.
Are you suggesting, for instance, that 6,000, potential 6,000, we should make it a $10,000 provision?
I think that's a great suggestion, yes.
Subject to future council discussion?
Yes.
It's almost like a reserve,
Yes,
a hold.
a reserve. I like the phrase. Good word.
What is that $50,000 we talked about yesterday as a council initiative on the education center at the Delawana? Are we going to budget for that? And would that land on this chart as well too?
I think it was suggested it would actually come out of reserves.
Okay.
So yes, the suggestion, because it is a one-time cost, we could draw from our operating reserve. If council, it is timely. If it was to happen, say, in March when our budget's already approved, it wouldn't amend the budget. So council does have the opportunity to include both the revenues from reserves and the related expenditure, or not. It's a nil impact on taxation. If council wants to see it there, we could absolutely put it there.
Was that your suggestion, Councillor Bochek?
No, I'm far from being an accountant. I trust our finance department to make things land where they should land, and I just didn't see it here. And when you reminded me it was a capital funded or a reserve funded thing, then I'm fine with that. It doesn't need to be here.
Actually, if I could continue on that topic, funding it from reserves means you're funding it from previous contributions of taxpayer dollars that have been put into reserves. Funding it from operating revenues means you're putting it into the current tax flow. My belief is that this is such an important project for our township and for our residents that I would be comfortable putting it into the current tax stream and not funding it out of past contributed reserve taxation that has gone into reserves.
Just on that point, are we still working off the premises that $100,000 spent in revenues equates to 1% increase in tax levy? And that would be a concern of mine here, that we're already looking at quite an increase in the tax levy for this year. And if we start putting council initiatives and not paying for them out of reserves, that's going to increase that amount. And I'm getting a little worried about how high that amount is. Just again, my uneducated non-accountant speak.
The current number is about 58,000. That equates 1%.
58,000, 1%.
So in other words, this 50,000, for argument's sake, we'd call that's a 1% hit to the township portion of the property taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a final decision, yay, nay, on reserves, or?
Any other comments?
Well, I'm going to just comment that in some respects, it's, fair enough to show it so that it appears to be an increase because it's a good investment in the future. So that's the plus on that side. However, politically expedience would say, try and keep your percentage as low as possible. So I think those are the things that we need to weigh and decide on how to do that kind of thing. It's an accurate reflection, actually, by putting it in, not using reserves. Anyway,
But,
for what it's worth.
and I think we have to recognize that reserves, like every year, we have collected more operating reserves than we required. The
Mhm.
operating reserves balance has been growing. And that's taxes that we have collected from our residents each year. So every year we've asked residents to put a little bit more money in than we actually need, as it turns out. We've been fortunate.
Well,
And
being this is going to be a legacy project, I think using legacy funds from the reserve to fund it would not be a bad idea. It's not that this is going to be a one-time hit. This is going to be an expense that's going to go on for years and years and years as we move towards development of this project. So I think we're going to be seeing it year after year as an expense that is going to affect the tax rate. So I'm not opposed to it coming out of reserves this one time and then looking at rebuilding those reserves at the same rate we've been doing, or even increase that in the future, because we know this is going to be there's going to be an expense attached to this to the township. Even though there's going to be a lot of funding, there's still going to be a lot of funding needed by our ratepayers as well too. So that's just my thoughts on it.
Sorry to interrupt. Is this a capital reserve issue?
No, this is an operating reserve.
Operations.
Okay.
and excuse me, last year we did it out of reserves, I believe. Did we not, or was it whenever that was? Spring 2022, we spent $50,000 on this project. Did that come out of reserves or out of?
Yes, it
Yes.
did. Yep. What about 50-50, like 25,000 from the operating budget and 25,000 from the operating reserve?
Councillor Bocek, was that wagging your finger at us, or is that saying yes?
No, I thought that was a pretty good idea, actually. That's a good thought.
My thoughts on this are, to me, reserves are for projects or expenses we don't currently anticipate. And this is something we do anticipate. And therefore, it should be acknowledged that we're going to be spending this money. Whether it comes out of reserves or not, I think it should be acknowledged within our current financial statements that we've got this amount of money that we know we are going to be spending. And reserves are that. The reserves are for rainy day or unanticipated expenses in my mind, and so they don't have anything allocated to them until we need it. But this is something we need before we have established our budget. So why not acknowledge it?
I agree with that on capital reserves, but on operational reserves, I think the opportunity is there. Well, you know what? We have some pretty smart financial people sitting at the table here. Let's listen to them instead of me.
And the consequence of all our conversation is that we'll end up with a draft 2. The draft 2 may or may not look more or less pleasant than the draft 1. Time will tell. But at this stage, we're talking about where the 2024 budget for council is current, and draft 1 is $93,000. We've added $10,000 for the Honeybee Festival, $10,000 for council provisions, and potentially $50,000, up to $50,000 for the next stage of the Davis Center. So that could be adding 70 to making that line council total 163,000 versus 93 on this page.
Again, I have no issue with that. I mean, and if we're pulling some of it from reserves somewhere else in the budget, that's fine.
Well, then why don't we say this page is now going to add up to 163,000, and let's see how we got, a couple dozen more pages to go, I think, or I don't know how many.
The next subject is environment, and the big change here is that we moved the water quality testing from general government to this. And we also propose no barge large item pickup in 2024 to resume in 2025.
Right.
Is the large item collection for water access properties included in this area, or is it somewhere else in the budget?
Sorry, Councillor Predicate, you talking about the large item
district.
barge, or you talking?
No, the district
The district,
led.
that is within the district budget, and I believe that they, as far as I know, that will be happening again next year. Yeah, they will still bill us through there.
Yeah, I'm going the wrong way now. But they do bill us back for it, and as we get closer to looking at what that number from the district might be, there was the suggestion to decrease the tonnage by including someone like Habitat for Humanity and the Restore to divert furniture items and usable items so that it's not collected by the district, and we don't pay for that stuff that they're currently collecting and putting into landfill, which is quite considerably heavy.
Point of clarification, Greg, if you don't mind. When you're talking about district service for large items, we're not talking about a barge in this particular case. We're just talking about the district coming with a truck to pick up large items. Is that correct or not?
Yeah, that's correct, Councillor Cooper. Yeah, the two events, one in Honey Harbour and the other one in Miners Bay.
That will continue, but with the truck and the barge service, we at the beginning said here that will resume again in 2025.
Yeah, that's my recommendation. The tonnage hasn't really changed following COVID. When you look at the numbers from 2022 and 2023, the tonnage remains static, and the barging capacity was around about 50%. So that's why the suggestion is made to hold off for 24 and then go at it again in 2025.
And thank you for that. And I just wanted to reiterate something I think I said to you directly, and that is that I think it makes sense to the barging frequency. In other words, is it every other year? In what communities does it go to? Is it every third year in small communities and every 2 years in larger communities? And remembering that we will still continue to have a truck in Miners Bay and Honey Harbour Church Bay. I think it's important to remember that, you know, there are 45 households in Wabautethi. There's 180 households in Go Home Bay. There are 600 households in Cognachine. There are 1,200 or 1,000 in Honey Harbour, etc. And there are about, if I remember correctly, there are about 700 in Go Home Lake and so forth. So we have some statistics that help us adjust our barging accordingly. Is that fair enough?
That sounds quite reasonable.
All right, thank you.
We also have history on what, you know, the tonnage that's been picked up at each of those locations. So that should be a guiding principle, a guideline as well.
I think, yes, that's true, except we need to remember that COVID threw a big wrench into everything, so that people didn't necessarily bring things and we were organizing, and thank you, Greg, for doing this, but the organization of the barging was more last minute than it had been in previous years. So there wasn't the same amount of warning, shall we say, for the community. So I just think we need to acknowledge that we have a bit of an anomaly period that's in there, and the tonnage is probably reflected in that. So thank you.
Just to Councillor Predko's point, I'll follow up with the district as to whether they're able to provide us with that additional restore service during the large item pickup days that they're going to organize. If I'm not mistaken, you'd also mentioned about picking up hazardous waste
That's
items.
right. Yeah.
And not wanting to speak for the district, but you need a special permit and a license to do that. So I very much doubt that that could be an additional tag on.
Sure, it's just worth an ask. That is one of the main asks when people are bringing things. They usually have hazardous materials with them that they get turned away with, so.
Can you remind me, and I apologize for this, the 150,000 in the 2023 budget in and out that's not in the 2024 budget?
It was the food cycler program.
That's the food cycler. Okay. Just
Uh,
want that confirmed. Thank you.
I would like to go back to Councillor Predko's point about the district bills us back. I don't believe the district bills the Township of Georgian Bay back, but rather it's built into the Township of Georgian Bay's waste levy, which is different than billing the Township of Georgian Bay back. It's still the same payers.
Yeah, no, but I thought we had we had been given a budget number last year for it. That's why I thought it was around $30,000 for the two events. But
Well, yeah, no, the district charges us through taxes for the, call it the onshore services.
Okay, so it's
But
not
it's
as,
only the barge services that we do on our own because district refuses to do it.
okay, I thought there was still a separate charge that they provided outside of the regular levy. Okay.
Well,
If
that's
it's-
how
if
they
it-
calculate their levy, is to include those costs in it.
Okay.
If I could just remind us, they did charge us in the past separately, I believe, but it still charged us. We pay the freight one way or another. It's where it shows up is really the reality of all this. Thank you.
The next section is CAO. There is the only change is an insurance redistribution change.
So you're saying we're paying insurance on our CAO?
It's general liability. Yeah. Yeah, we are.
Oh, good.
And which line item is that, Julie?
Contracted services.
Yes.
Thank you.
Clerk Wade, did you want to discuss directly, or do you want me to just continue on with my pre-notes, and if there's questions, we'll draw on you?
That sounds perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. So the major changes in the user fees, we realigned, we noted that our 2023 estimates of SRA and RAs, which are road allowance and shore road allowance sales, were a bit high, and that estimate came from 3 years of COVID, where a lot of people were buying their SRAs. So we've adjusted downwards back to reflect closer to where our 2023 actuals will land. And also on the expenditure side, insurance reallocations, and there is a savings from document storage. I could let Clerk Wade talk about our good news story. And there's also a new transfer from reserve that wasn't there in 2023 because we took it out in 2023 for elections, and this is for the 2026 elections. We are now reinstating that because council said we'll hold for 1 year. Questions? Good.
No, take it, whenever there's silence, take advantage of it and move on.
Sometimes I need.
I like
when
the
I'm on
silence on my part.
When I'm on the receiving end, sometimes I need just like a quick minute to
Yeah.
absorb.
And I can just ask if we, so we don't move on without any discussion on the
Oh.
clerks.
Fred,
The shore road allowances, so we had unexpectedly sold fewer shore road allowances this year, or was it the change in the policy that was the difference? A bit of both. Do we expect people will come back to the plate next year to buy their shore road allowance, or is that you can't predict?
I've had a lot of discussions with applicants, so it's
You
hard to
don't
tell.
I think it goes back to money is tight right now, so if this is a expense you could push off, you would do it.
I was just going to say, in the last 3 to 4 years, there's been a couple of very large SRAs as well that have significantly bumped that amount up that we don't have anticipated for the coming years. So,
And with each passing year, there's fewer and fewer shore road allowances that are in effect available because they get tied up, and some of them are motivated when people want to do renovations and things like that. So that's a revenue source that probably will continue to go down over the next decade or two, I would suggest.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, is that it's not a sustainable source of revenues. It will dwindle to, where there's no longer any available for sale, or very few.
Just on that subject, I think it's exactly correct. It will go down over time, and we need to remember that there are a number of areas that, if you look at shore road allowance right around the entire township, that there are a number of areas whereby there was never any shore road allowance in the first place. And that's because the property was acquired prior to shore road allowance being put in place. There's a lot of evidence of that. So we're picking up money along the way now, but not so much in the future. Thank you.
On the next portion is HR, health and safety. Consultants, I will do the same unless you prefer. So consultants for compensation review and pay equity are included, and also a big increase in legal due to help that we will need with collective bargaining. We last go around, we leaned a lot on the district for help. And paid them for some support at a very good rate. They are not available to help us this go around, therefore we have to go to outside sources. And we did also a consolidation of all kitchen supplies into the HR budget. So this is for all the kitchens around the townships, so whether in MacTier, the shop here, the admin building, the CSB, etc. And a new item is, of course, it also includes all training for that is generalized training for all staff, and a new initiative of reconciliation training in line with our new strategic plan initiative.
So why is district unavailable to assist this time around on legal? Did they say? I mean, would they be going through the same thing?
That was a question I had as well.
Last go around, we were very lucky to have the director of HR from the district join us. So she's since retired. So I've spoken to the new director who's not comfortable with providing that support. They reached out to, I'm not sure who is above them, and yeah, they just kind of came back and said, unfortunately, they're not able to provide that support this go around.
Isn't district supposed to be supporting us? I mean, just generally speaking.
That's a silly question.
They did do it for a fee last time. It was just quite a lower fee than getting an HR lawyer to help us.
So do we have an ability then to claim a credit back from the district because they're not providing service? And so once again, we keep paying, and they should provide the service, but they don't. So we should get a credit.
I don't believe this is an agreed upon service. This was just something they did out of goodwill at a cost plus. It was an additional cost, similar to us buying GIS services from the district. That is not something that they have to do. They do it because it's efficient to do so, and that's at an additional cost. It's not built into our district normal levies.
I would just point out, Julie, that we're sending almost 50% of our revenues collected in taxes over to the district. So they are really a customer of ours, and we need to think about it in those terms. We should be provided with services, and I suggest that we need to maybe put a call into the CAO and say, so why can't we provide this service now as we've been able to do in the past? We still have the same legal department, I believe. So, and if HR personnel has changed, I it sounds like is the person qualified to do it or just not in the mood to do it? And so I think we need to change our attitude. I'm sorry, but that's the way I feel about our expectations of the district. Thank you.
And point of clarification, I think we are a customer of theirs. They're not a customer of ours.
Excuse me. We are a customer of theirs. Yes, I think that's a way of putting it. So we should expect customer service. Thank you.
Well, if my experience with Bell is any indication, I don't think so. But anyway, that's besides the point.
No,
Councillor Bocek here. I have a question. This fee or this amount of money is going to be paid out to someone to help us with negotiations with a collective bargaining agreement with our union employees. Is that what we're talking about?
yeah, that's correct, Councillor Bocek. It's an activity that really is not. There is no relation with the district other than the last time this happened. The individual involved at the district was able to have the skills and qualifications for a fee, nonetheless, to be able to assist us. Now that individual, as Ms. Buchanan has mentioned, is retired. There is a new individual in the position, and I don't know the ins and outs, but maybe that individual isn't as comfortable or qualified to provide that same service. And so we have to pay for this service in one way or another, whether it's the district or whether it's to this third party that the district, I believe, is probably even using for their own purposes. So the district themselves are using this individual, and so are we. But there's no responsibility on the district's part to provide assistance, HR assistance or legal assistance for union negotiations that are purely township based.
Right. My understanding of this was a little bit different. My understanding was that in the past years, we had a 50% commitment with our HR department to the town of Penetang, and that we only had a 50% employee in our HR department, and that's why we used outside sources to help with union negotiations. So my question is, now that we have a full-time HR person in place, is it that they do not have the accreditation to carry out this feat, or is it something that you have to go outside of and use somebody with a particular negotiating skill? I'm just unfamiliar with why we can't use our own in-house people to do the negotiations.
Yeah, so it is quite an art. On the one hand, and just to answer that relationship with Penetang, we actually reduced headcount in our department, because at one point we were at two HR folks when we broke that relationship off with Penetang Machine, and we've actually dropped down to one. And so, as you know, it's just Ms. Buchanan. We did not replace. Oh gosh, I forget. Tammy Martin. We did not replace Ms. Martin as the director at the time. And yeah, it's quite an art form when you're entering negotiations with unions, and so that's why we feel that not to say that Miss Buchanan over time, as she gains experience, doesn't once she's gone through a few of these, that she wouldn't want to have a go at it herself. However, it's really best for us to get external expertise for next year.
Good, thank you for that. I appreciate the answer on that.
Councillor Graziano here. I'm going to chime in if I can. Sorry, I'm driving, gentlemen, so if you hear anything in the background, I do apologize in advance. Collective bargaining is very much an art. There's two streams of HR. There's a generalist who's going to be pretty much all-encompassing, but not necessarily have the collective bargaining experience in the background. I mean, they'll be able to deal on a day-to-day basis with unions, but it's not something that they'll be negotiating. So this is very much a fee that, based on our renegotiations for this year, is warranted. Hiring an external consultant to do this on our behalf because we don't have the resources within the District of Muskoka makes absolute sense. And I support this as an HR practitioner.
If I could just add in, I don't
That
mind.
additional information. I appreciate that too, Christian.
And if I could just add in a couple of things, I don't disagree that we need an expert. One suggestion might be is that we did have somebody that was very good at the district that I think is retired. Is that person available for consulting services? Might be worthy of an inquiry with the CAO at the district through our CAO, Mariotti. So just a suggestion for you. And I just would like to clarify also that we did have two people in HR, it was charged over two municipalities, so the equivalent of one in each one. And well, that's where we are today. So there's no real reduction. It's just we've rejigged things. Thank you. I hope that's correct because that's my understanding of it.
I can quickly just answer the first part of that question. So I did actually reach out to the individual who helped us last time. I was able to get her personal contact information, and unfortunately she is enjoying retirement and not interested in consulting. So.
And to the second part, you're incorrect, Councillor Cooper. We did have two FTEs in HR in 2022 when I joined, and then when Ms. Martin left for another opportunity, we decided to hold still and see how Ms. Buchanan enjoyed the new role, and so we're down to one FTE.
So just clarification, please. For many years, we were sharing the two people between the two municipalities. You're telling me in 2022 we stopped doing that? Is that correct?
22.
Yeah, so it was in 2022 that we stopped that shared service. So beforehand, Tammy Martin was a full-time permanent Georgian Bay employee, and Penetanguishene purchased half of her services, and then opposite for me. So I was a full-time Penetanguishene employee, and Georgian Bay purchased half of my services. So I guess you could kind of look at it as 1.5 employees. And then the township here decided to add a HR coordinator full-time position. So I came on full-time. So that's when we went to 2 FTEs. And then once Tammy resigned, we moved back down to 1 full-time employee.
Thank you for the clarification. So we basically, most of the time, had a shared service and we changed it in 2022, just for clarification. Thank you.
Council have any suggestions, adding, removing, or moving on to the next one?
I don't think I heard any changes, just we went through explanations.
Sustainability communications. So the big change here is that some of the 2023 initiatives were funded by reserves, and now that they are a continuing effort, we need to fund them through taxation. It's next.
What are the contracted services, please?
Does that include insurance?
Yeah, let me pull that up. A lot of it is advertising.
What advertising, please?
Just speculating, Councillor Cooper, but I would think that is the advertising for planning when you have notifications to go out and that kind of stuff?
No.
No?
This is, there's a Townfolio initiative. There is annual advertising, and then there's a new edition this year. So it would be any kind of advertising that the township would undergo. I don't have the specific.
What's Townfolio?
Townfolio is, I believe, a portal that we purchase for statistics. I believe all the statistics that came forward from the strat plan were drawn from Town Folio.
And further to Councillor Cooper's question, when we talked about advertising, I'm aware that on Facebook and other social media platforms, you often pay for messages to be delivered in certain areas, etc. Is that what some of the advertising funds are?
Might I suggest, if you can't access that information, I'd like to see a breakdown in this line item. It's a fair chunk of money, and be interesting to know what it is. Thank you.
Sorry, we're just having some technical difficulties getting Ms. Schneier to join. But she's here and is trying to respond to these questions.
I think Town Folio is a demographics analysis product, so I think that's what is used for some of the targeting that they do for their advertising, which I think is also on Facebook and Instagram and likely newspapers as well, but I'm sure she can answer.
So if I could just draw this back, one of the things when we talk about communications that we've been working on as a council is to continue the direction that has been provided over and over and over again for direct outbound email communications, which ultimately will have a cost to effectively capture email addresses into a database from which we can then effectively use them. We have continually, as council, coached staff that social media is not the channel that our residents generally focus on. And so I would suggest that we would be wanting to consider shifting the expenses on communications to align with the direction provided by council.
I'd support that completely. Thank you. And it's not to say that social media isn't used, but I think to assume that our residents are using social media and through the township of Georgian Bay are two different things. So thank you.
I think maybe we can come back to this once Ms. Schneier has overcome her technical difficulties.
Let's move on, but come back to this a little bit later.
Sure, and I'll skip over the next one. The next one is food bank, so I'll skip over that one completely. So we can go on to finance.
I wonder who will speak to this line, this page.
So there's no significant changes in finance. The 2023 asset management project, which was practically revenue neutral, was removed. Are there any questions?
And this, of course, also includes all of IT as well, correct?
Nope, there's a separate.
So your contracted services would include your auditors, for instance?
Yes, auditors, insurance.
Peer reviews?
Our study. Which is partially funded from reserves.
It's not an important number or a big number, but what are the legal and solicitor costs used for?
It was very prevalent when we had a DC appeal. All of the legal costs fell in finance because development charges are coordinated by finance. So it's not big.
Did we win?
Pardon?
Did we win?
No.
I'm sure for that price, you're getting a signature, and that's about it.
And was that a commercial development charge challenge?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure council is aware of the matter. It was very prevalent at the time where we passed our DC, and it got resolved where they were awarded 3 years to construct with a waiver of development charges.
Thank you.
And probably these charges, development charges haven't been paid because they haven't developed yet?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'll move on to the next one, which is IT. So one of the big changes is seems when we consolidated all of IT stuff in 2023, we missed the software cost of the fire software, which was minimal at the time. We are moving to a new fire software, and that is part of the cost. Also, cyber insurance was not allocated to IT budget, which was just generally assigned. Therefore, that is the other major change in the IT budget.
So where will the costs associated with migrating to a new ERP come?
It's not budgeted at all at this point. We're not.
We don't really want to be talking about that now.
It'll come forward in a separate report.
So my concern is we may have a significant expense, and I would rather not know about.
Councillor Hazelton,
Yes.
I don't think we should pursue this this subject in open.
We can't pursue it in open. Let's make sure that we aren't making budget decisions without that information. Thank you.
I think Clerk Way is there is a possibility that we could go into close to talk about a few matters, which this might be one of them as well. If we get to that point where we need to make decisions.
Correct. I know we did just talk about this a little bit yesterday, though, so I don't know if much has changed between yesterday and today on this particular matter. However,
we didn't talk about costs, and we could, and where the funding could come from.
Yes. We can go into closed today. I would prefer if we wait to go into closed at our November 29th meeting. From a procedural.
I'm fine with that. I don't want to talk about it anymore at the moment necessarily, but what I do want to do is agree with Councillor Cooper that we need to make sure that we have a complete budget, and if there are other potential items that may be presented to us for whatever reason, let's make sure that we don't miss them in the next round.
I'd say, among other things, we want to make sure we have adequate operating reserves to cover anticipated costs, even if they can't be finalized.
Thank you.
The next subject is fire department. One of the big change on the revenue side is we assumed a burn permit at $20 a permit, which generates about $40,000 to $45,000. Also, the training and development costs are a lot of them are deferred from 2023, so there's a big decrease there. And also the annual software costs were moved to the IT budget. So a big reduction in fire department costs of
So the cost recovered line, is that the anticipated $20 burn permit thing?
No, it would be in line 155 user fees.
In 2023, we had discussions about burn permit fees, and as I recall, the department was not in favor of them, but I'm assuming that means that they are looking to change the approach for 2024.
If I recall, I believe the department was in favor last year, but council chose not to implement that.
Council that chose?
So
Okay.
we're kind of trying to slide it back in as a cost recovery kind of, exercise.
So that is probably warrants a discussion of more significance than in the context of this budget review. So I suspect that my fellow councillors will want to have that on the table for discussion before we are presented with another revision of the budget.
So
Specifically because all of council recommended and decided not to charge for fire permits. And if the fire department is recommending it, that's fine. It should come forward as a recommendation and subsequent approval, as opposed to being slid into the budget and accidentally approved.
can you confirm the amount? I mean, is it 2,500 times 20 equals $50,000, for instance? What is the amount that you have in this budget for fire permit revenue?
$40,000.
40,000, okay. So 2,000 properties times $20 okay,
Yep.
thank you. Just for everybody's information.
And just for comparison, our neighbors are charging $40 per burn permit. And if you have a property that has two places, two fire pits, then they're charged 2 times. So some places pay $80 if they have 2 fire
They're
pits.
charging $40 per fire pit, so to speak.
Yeah.
How many permits have we issued in previous years?
2,000 this year.
How many, sorry?
2,000.
So we're saying if we start charging $20 that nobody's going to walk away?
Yeah. So yeah, those are discussions that I don't personally think that we have the time or the. I think that warrants a broader discussion. But the one of the most valuable aspects of the fire permit process is the collection of email and phone numbers and accurate address information for each resident, and that's almost half of the properties in our township. So
Yeah, I got to say wrong to that, and I don't even want to have that discussion. This is a budget meeting, and your opinion, Al, really doesn't enter into this. You're speaking for council, and you're not speaking for me.
I'm going to chime in here. It's Councillor Graziano again, very quickly on the burn permit issue. I would agree with respect to a report, and the reason being is because I'm curious to know what our fall off rate is going to be if in the event that we implement a cost for permit. The idea here is that we understand where these are, we understand when they're burning, and I would hate to see our constituents opt not to purchase a permit and try to get away with burns rather than having an opportunity to purchase or acquire a free permit, comply with our requirements, and have our fire department know where things are. So I'm just curious. I think there's a little bit more in-depth understanding here before we can pass. Well, at least I would prefer to pass this. That's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And it's that what you've raised is what we considered previously, and hopefully we'll have a discussion to consider that again. Thank you.
I guess from my perspective is kind of knowing where council is leaning, if council would like this item removed for draft 2.
Well, I can speak for myself, and I would like it removed from draft 2.
I think. I mean, I apply for a permit every year, and I wouldn't mind paying. So.
I would view some of these additional fees, the MAT tax and this, I don't mind them being included, but I think we need to identify them as I don't want to call them, proposed, as opposed to, just included in the line items. I don't know if there's a way that you could break it out separately so that we can see them and review them at some future time easily and not forget about them.
Burning is a way of life up here. It's not like you're living in Scarborough. We burn for heat. We burn to cook our food. You don't want to be taxing people, to provide heat or provide a cooking. So this is a slippery slope we're going down here. I can tell you, if you put in a $40 fee for a burn permit, your 2,000 permits are going to go down to about 4, which is the 4 people sitting here.
Heating is not included as part of that. Burn permit is for an open fire.
Look, the semantics are there. You can talk about it all day long. We're talking budget here. And I was asked if we should remove this line item from the budget. And I said, yes, you can say what you want. But I think it's a ridiculous idea. It's to allow our fire department to know that there's smoke coming from my backyard, but Bocek's cooking some wieners. Let's get realistic here.
And I'm going to chime in and agree with Brian on that. I think this is going to penalize our full-time residency rather than our seasonal cottagers and residents as well. I just don't see the net benefit of charging $20 and recuperating $40,000 in revenue. I mean, I'm sure we can find $40,000 somewhere else to bring back into our coffers. I think this should be just a simple sign-up program, and you're done with it. Let's try to facilitate and acquire compliance through people registering for free rather than looking for a means in which to further tax. And tax a population that is likely going to be utilizing this year round. I just don't see a value in that. Thank you.
My only counter to that is going to be that the majority of people who get burn permits must be seasonal because we only have so many year-rounders here. So having said that, it's obviously a significant portion of our so-called seasonal residents are getting burn permits. But having said that, I've also hearing a lot of people say, take it out. So why don't we take it out for draft 2? So that's $40,000 revenue lost going from draft 1 to draft 2.
The next one is fire facilities. Major changes here is the insurance allocation and the utility cost adjusted to actuals. The next one is bylaw services. The major increase in user fees and charges is this one here is the registration cost for short-term rental, and also a related increase in fines and penalties due to the fact that one, we saw a lot more in 2023, so we're kind of bringing the number up to actuals, but also due to the new short-term rental policy. And on the expense side, we're looking at the hearing officer for the AMP program. So that is offset with the increase in fines and penalties.
And I presume the Granicus costs are in here.
Pardon?
Granicus costs, excuse me, the Granicus costs would be included on
Yes.
contracted services.
Yes.
Do we expect, as we move to AMPS, there could be any additional legal or solicitor costs associated with appeals or people contesting the decisions?
I think that's the hearing officer.
But beyond that, is there any likelihood that somebody could take us to court for any other reason? Okay.
If we go past the AMP system and we decide to charge someone in the courts, that's when you'll start to incur some additional legal costs. Through the AMP system, it's a pretty clear-cut two-stage process.
So just noting that the legal expense line hasn't changed between the 2 years, so there's going to be no difference between what we've done before with the provincial system compared to the AMP system for outside legal.
Yeah, let's say you take someone to, if you go past that, then you have to take someone to court because something is so serious. So that's why we still keep that buffer in there. Yeah.
Thank you.
I did note the question and we'll ask the fire chief directly. The next one is emergency management, no change, status quo. The building department is net zero when considering salaries and benefits. The only difference is that we are anticipating a contribution to reserve of 74 instead of a draw from reserve of 113 that we budgeted for in 2023.
Why is that?
User fees and charges include what, Julie? 202, line 202.
It's all the building department fees. Yes, so that would be
Okay, yeah, all
building-
permitting fees, that type of thing, right?
Yeah, it would be our building permit fees and our maintenance fees and any other kind of miscellaneous fees I would believe we take in.
Okay, I guess you include the $200 I paid out this year. Okay, good.
Yes, and every year. Thank you for that.
Hey, me too. I pay every year.
Thank you all.
Can you explain the differences in, I mean, obviously we put a budget in for transferring from reserve fees in which the great majority were not taken. And so now you're expecting to transfer to reserves out. Can you explain that? Because it's quite a significant switch around.
Our user fees are greater than what they were budgeted, so we've adjusted the budget for that, and we anticipate that our user fees will exceed the total building department costs when you include salaries and benefits, which aren't included in here for the benefit of because all salaries or benefits are later.
So which basically means right now you're showing bottom line forecast 624,000 in the hole for 2023, or sorry, to the good, and 609 to the good budget. That's basically what you have for salaries and related salary expenses for those departments. So it would end up being total zero.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly. You got it.
In other words, another way of putting this is that the building department has become a profit center.
COVID had a lot to do with that. It is changing.
So maybe what we could do here is say Kaylee has turned her department into a profit center. Maybe the mandate to each of the departments is to turn them all of them into profit centers. Just kidding.
Are you suggesting toll roads, sir?
Wouldn't that be up to district?
The next section is planning. Planning revenues increased to reflect the 2023 actual and considering also a revision of user fees with new fees or tweaking how we do fees.
Julie, I have a question here. It's Councillor Bochak.
Yep.
Being these are planning fees and that we know forecasting and moving forward that the Tickner subdivision off of Honey Harbor Road that we have acquired or inherited, there's quite a bit of cost and expenditure to bring that into some sort of development stage. And I thought the fees would be shown here because we were given some sort of estimates at that time of where we would be financially with it. And that could be in operations because I know Brad from operations was very involved in it. I don't know if we're going to see the figures there. I didn't think so.
I'm looking at my colleagues here.
I know we've already engaged in some studies and engineer studies and peer reviews and that. So there's got to be expenses put somewhere for it.
Through the mayor, we did not budget for anything above just general engineering fees at this time. It is going to be a significant expense. We don't know the scope of that, and that is something we plan to bring forward in 2024 once we have the cost estimate, as well as bringing forward options for paying for it. So at this time, we felt it was preliminary or too early to put that in the budget.
Thanks for that, Brad. I appreciate it.
And Julie, in terms of the planning reviews, and I'm assuming the transfer from reserve is a specific reserve that we have. So, and it looks like the cost of the service is going to be more than the amount in the reserve. So there's no other money in that reserve that could be transferred. That's
Correct.
the amount. Okay, thank you.
So specifically, we anticipate 150 of contracted costs for planning reviews, and the reserve is 75.
Thank you.
So what this suggests to me is that our planning department clearly is not a profit center.
Correct, and then there's salaries and benefits in addition to that.
Yes, the reason I look at that is I look at the planning department, look at the building department. Let's say they're comparable size, maybe the building is slightly smaller, but their fees are at least double, almost triple what our planning department is. And anyway, just an observation.
You're absolutely right, Mayor Coutier, and I think council has heard in the past that we have some very, very low fees within the province. So that is going to be part of Mr. Whitlib's work plan, is that for 2024 that we bring forward some suggested changes to the fees for council to hopefully consider and adopt for us to be a little bit more on a cost recovery basis, for sure.
Is there any way to accelerate that in ballpark terms and plug some numbers into the budget? I mean, if we're undercharging, it sounds like the planning department is operating at a loss just from a cost of doing business outside of the human side of things. And I understand that Derek may do some more detailed research, but if you need to bring to council some revised numbers that we'll call them ballpark numbers that will get us into a better place, rather than wait till mid-24 and have them effective 25, can we accelerate that?
Yeah, so to Ms. Bouthellet's point, Mr. Whitlib has increased for 2024's budget the user fees and charges revenue somewhat. In terms of prioritizing this, we understand that we need to work on this. So it is gonna come down the pipeline in 24, Councillor Hazelden. I can't give you an exact date right now, but it is something that is definitely on Mr. Whitlib's and the planning department's work plan.
I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one thing I find interesting is the building permit fees are basically a percentage of the project. In other words, the bigger the project, the higher the building fees.
Yes, you're correct. So what happens is the fee as it's calculated, we'll look at the construction value and determine the fee based on our bylaw.
But to the best of my knowledge, our planning fees aren't scalable the same way. In other words, if you apply for if you need a planning permission to build a 10 square meter shed or 1,000 square meter bunkie or cottage, I think our planning fees are more or less the same.
So if you're talking about the review planning does in relation to a building permit application, they're basically done under our fees and charges bylaw. I think mostly it's $75 for minor things. I think 150 for houses, but that possibly could be changing because we're possibly heading towards a zoning certificate, and that in that case they'll have their own fees associated with that will be set at that time.
Yeah, but my point being is I'm going on the presumption that if you have $1 million home that you're inspecting versus a $50,000 shed, you're going to spend a lot more time on it. Whereas I think with our planners, that $1 million home, they may end up spending a lot more time on it because it may need 4 or 5 variances, and I'm just making this up as I go along, versus something else that is almost straightforward like a consent, and yet the fees, I don't think, are relative to the hours worked.
No, and right now, unfortunately he's not here, but a lot of those cases ahead of time, they do their pre-application consultation, which as far as I know is a flat fee.
Okay. I think that is a factor that we have to consider, is that while the building permits are scalable, if I can use the phrase, planning permits much less so.
If I might add, included in the 469 of expenses for the planning department is $180,000 of legal and solicitor costs. You cannot recover that by a user fee. Those are when we fight decisions. So those are not recoverable. If they were recoverable, they wouldn't be sitting in legal and solicitor fee. And also in line 224 of contracted services, we've got $150,000 for the planning reviews. So those also are not recoverable by user fees.
Oh, fair enough. But having said that, I think that it would be interesting, and no, I don't want staff to spend weeks' time analyzing this, but I think I'm sure our planners would advise us that in some files they spend 10 hours, in some files they spend 100 hours, and the fee might be the same.
If I could just add in what I think you're saying here is that while legal fees are not recoverable, we can increase our planning fees and cover some of that expense. And I think we should. Thank you.
I have a question, and it relates to the budget in one way, but if you take a scenario like we just finished with the OPA with 6 Mile Lake, the planning time that was spent on that through Mr. Kratky must have been quite exorbitant. And I don't see a bill going out to the cottage associations, or I don't see a bill going out to anybody for that work. That work is done and absorbed. The cost of it is just absorbed by the township, correct?
Yeah, that is correct, Councillor Bocek, including any legal fees and the facilitation fees, of course.
So there's a lot more buried within the budget that we not necessarily recoverable. Okay, I understand it now. Thank you.
All right, so no changes to that, though obviously there's definite interest in reviewing planning fees.
The next is cemeteries. There's not a significant change, and I am sure that Clerk Way and Finance Department will be reviewing the use of cemetery care and maintenance fund in 2024. Operations admin, there is a $15,000 reduction in consulting fee allowance as there will be no road study in 2024, or it is funded by the 2023 budget if carried forward is required. And there is an increase in training and development.
So what line item would those be? Sorry, Judy, what line item were you just talking about?
Yes, so the both of those are in contracted services.
Okay, thank you.
The next is road maintenance township. One-time increase in ditching budget from 15,000 to 40,000, and also decrease in consultant and subcontracting allowance from 51 to 21.
Again, that come under contracted services, Julie? Julie, that comes under contracted services?
Yes. Both of those. In district roads, no significant change from 2023.
So I have a question, if I may. There was some discussion recently about the township taking ownership of the district roads or having the district somehow reallocate them or whatever. So my question would be, if that is a path, how does that impact these revenues and expenses?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Hazelton. That is something that I understand the district has recently reinitiated, looking at potential reallocation of roads. The financials are the big issue, and I think that's where things got bogged down last time this was looked at 4 or 5 years ago. Because if we're taking over assets that the district currently uses, we either want reserves provided to us so that we can fix them up, or we want the roads built to a proper standard before we take them over. So at this time, I don't see this happening in the next year or probably even next 2 years, but when that does happen, the financial aspect will be looked at very closely by people such as Miss Bouthillette to ensure that we're getting a reasonable deal.
Thank you very much for that answer.
Just on that question, I'm curious, if the district had to fix them up, who would they be billing other than us?
Through the mayor, they have their own, as I understand it, they have their own reserves. So they would have to dip into those reserves to fix them up or tax people more to fix them up. It wouldn't be a bill just to the township of Georgian Bay. It would be.
No, it'd be you're saying it'd be sorry, you'd be saying it'd be across the district, but if they increase the taxes versus reserves, it would hit us. Our ratepayers would be hit. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to note that in the district budget, roads, and if I include bridges and culverts and all that sort of stuff connected with roads, are one of the biggest items in the district budget. It's also one of the biggest areas of, excuse me, of reserves in the district reserves. And all of us, including our township, we pay a significant portion of the property taxes we pay to district is for roads, bridges, culverts, and the like. And it doesn't mean we'll necessarily get that much back without increasing the conversations and pointing out the shortcomings in the services they're providing to the western flank of the district. And I'm using one example of 12 Mile Bay Road. We had to fight like crazy for them to patch parts of it. And the parts they didn't, and apparently the parts that are really bumpy right now that they didn't patch were better than what they did patch. Which is debatable in some stretches in my mind. But anyway, it is absolutely an active conversation at district, and they are going to review what roads qualify, what it needs to qualify as a district road. But they put so many potential qualifications in there because it's one way for some municipalities to upload road expenses to district and other municipalities to sponsor that. Sorry, that was a little political editorial.
If I may add,
Actually, what you've just said, though, if I may, indicates that it's a bigger topic than this brief conversation, and there's a lot of implications of either being in or out. And it would scare me a whole lot if we transferred all the district roads to the township, but we're still on the hook to participate in the district road taxation funding.
That's one side of it. And the other is if the district roads were to be transferred to us, the proportionate element of the reserve should also be transferred. And I think that is a wonderful conversation to have, but district's nowhere near having that conversation yet. It's only been brought back to the table at this moment.
Thank you for that.
Mr. Sokash.
If I can just add one thing. Things are so preliminary right now. I don't anticipate this impact in the 2024 budget and probably not the 2025 budget either.
Yeah, but it's still good to have goals. What this tells me, though, just to get back to it, that you're basically charging district twice of what it costs us to provide services.
No, there's no salaries and benefits in that budget.
Oh, you caught me on
either.
that one. Thank you for pointing that out. So it's a break even?
If I may add one more thing to that, we are going through a review and a revampment of the amount that we're charging the district for maintenance of the roads. We've just started that, but that will have an impact, positive impact. We're going to ensure to that, right, Julie? Or Greg's going to make sure that we ensure to that. And so the rates will be going up. I don't know the timing for that, but I think it's a 3 or 4 month process.
Thank you for that.
And to your point that is a break even, the goal currently is a 12% administration profit on the revenues that we bill out to the district. Nowhere near enough to cover. This is a very simple budget. It's only there because it's a different cost center for us. It's where we put time and efforts into snow clearing for the bin sites.
Sorry, snow clearing?
Yes.
Okay.
The next major one is fleet maintenance, and I'm going to take a little break and let Brad take this one over.
Thank you, Julie. As council may recall from the report yesterday, we are significantly over in this line item for 2023. There are numerous reasons for that. Historically, we've under budgeted for the repairs and maintenance costs, basically for parts. This year, we also had to use a contractor for 2 or 3 months of the year because we didn't have a mechanic. We have some old equipment that we need to look at replacing. We'll be discussing that in the capital, but again, we put quite a bit of money into a couple of those pieces of equipment. Long story short, we're increasing the equipment repair and maintenance budget in order to try to catch up to where it should be. I think every year since I've been here, we've been over, and unfortunately has been one of the first ones to be cut back when we were trying to reduce our budget. we've increased our gas allowance as was discussed earlier. We're including an allowance for the mobile mechanic, and that hasn't been in there before because we are working to change a little bit, change our priorities. Fire equipment, which fire trucks, which we also maintain, if they go down, almost always they're a higher priority than our plows, but not much. And if they're down and they're being repaired by a mechanic and we have a plow go down, which seems to happen in the winter all the time, then that plow isn't working and we're having to deal with things another way. So in order to keep more of a focus on our plow equipment, we're including an allowance for mobile mechanic. We'll probably primarily be working on fire equipment when our mechanic isn't available. And one other reason for us being over budget this year is we have a new mechanic. He's doing a fair bit more maintenance than was done in-house in the past. So we did spend a fair bit of money on equipment for him to do that, such as jacks, ramps for the truck, which are just horrifically expensive for a large truck. But we think we're pretty much there when it comes to ordering that material. Thank you.
So even though you spent significantly more in 2023 than you anticipated, you still expect your expenditures to go down in 24 compared to actual 23?
Absolutely. And if they don't, Mr. Mariotti is going to have me in his office for a while.
Looking ahead to 2025, will the purchase of the new fire trucks make a significant difference to your maintenance budget?
It will impact it for sure. The new trucks, you have your warranty. Of course, things don't break nearly as often. So hopefully that will allow us to reduce, but probably not eliminate the $15,000 allowance. Unfortunately, when things break, they all like to break at the same time. And yeah, and if our mechanic's doing one thing and the fire truck needs to be fixed, we got to get somebody.
Now, I hate to put it this way, but without fire trucks and plows, we have a lot of unhappy residents.
We need a larger customer service budget, yes.
All right. If there's no other comments on fleet maintenance, I'm going to suggest a break. It's almost 11 o'clock. We've been at this for near 2 hours. So let's take a 10-minute break and get back to it, please. Yeah, but,
Where I'm here. I had a.
oh. So I was going to say to Councillor Bochek, you're making reference to beverages, and I think, isn't it a little too early in the morning and against your current diet to have that kind of beverage?
3 hour time change and blood pressure's good.
All right. All right. Council, we're going to get back at it. Just so you know, in our first 2 hours, we took this budget and it's now $121,500 worse than when we started. Just saying. But with that,
It's okay. We can depend on staff to reduce elsewhere to accommodate that.
yeah, well, I'm sure they'll make some recommendations and then we'll cringe at some of them. But
Yeah.
having said that, I'm going to turn it back to Ms. Boutiette to go on to the next page in her schedule, please.
Our next section is sidewalks, and I'm gonna lump it in with street lighting as there is not a lot of changes in sidewalks, and street lighting increase is to bring the utility costs closer to actuals.
Question. Sidewalks. Are these on our roads or are these on district roads?
Some of them are on our roads, some of them are on district roads, but they're the township responsibility. The district doesn't do sidewalks in general.
And do we get reimbursed by district for doing their sidewalks?
We do not. If we want sidewalks, we have to pay to put them in and pay to maintain them, and that's what's happened. And the other municipality I was in a two-tier municipality, two-tier situation. It was the same thing.
Interesting.
If you have any pull at the district or know anybody that does.
Well, I know people who do, but they're not part of our municipality. Something about numbers and all that. Okay, just was curious.
Sorry, just to be clear, if there's a sidewalk that's on a district road, we are in charge of it. Is that correct? All expenses to do with that sidewalk, Brad?
Through the mayor, that is correct. And in fact, if there's a sidewalk on a district road, in all likelihood, it was put there at the request and at the expense of the township.
Would that also apply then to any future shoulder paving for lifestyle things like cycling and stuff like that?
Yeah, active transportation lanes?
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
and the reason I'm shaking my head a little bit is we have the active transportation lane in McTier along District Road 11. I've yet to see a bill for any work that they have done on that, other than building it initially, but the plowing and any of the other work the district has been covering. But maybe that's between you and I.
So what we should be doing is taking all our sidewalks and switching them to active transportation lanes.
Yes, please.
I'd be on side with that too. Brad?
Add another 100K to the budget.
We will take our direction from council and do the best we can with what we have.
There is real challenges to this two-tiered structure that was inflicted upon us 53 years ago.
Well, sorry, and to use a pun, it seems to be a one-way street.
Especially when you're one of the ones that was included for your funding abilities.
Yeah.
Okay. But having said that, this is probably one of the lowest value, not quite the lowest, but one of the lowest value schedules we have in front of us.
And in terms of streetlights, before we run on, is there a cost recovery? I think on people's tax bills, there's an item for streetlight.
Not in this municipality.
Not in this one? Okay, thank you.
Are you seeing a revenue opportunity?
Offset.
There was the opportunity. I know I have a street light on my street, and we were charged for it and paid annually for it. But I think it was a few years ago that was taken out and just put into the common coffers for everybody to pay for.
Thanks. I thought it was your area that had that, so thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to shoot out my street light so I can see the stars.
Well, I suggest that there are no free lunches. You may want to rethink that one.
Have we ever, did we, Councillor Bochek, was there a time that we charged for streetlights?
Yeah, I believe there was a subline on my tax bill that in certain areas that like Hillside Drive that I live on, there was streetlights installed, and I believe we paid for them. It was on our tax bill. But sometime in the past, I remember coming to council, and it was just easier to include it in the general levy instead of individually taxing residents for streetlights. And that's the way I remember it. Anyways, it could be researched. And Brad's shaking his head, yes.
Yeah, I was around at that period as well, but it could be treated just like water and sewer.
Okay. Next.
Our next is facilities, an overall increase of 16,226. The user fees were adjusted. Same with contracted services, with the realignment of the insurance cost again. And we do have a new repair and maintenance cost, and this is for the decommissioned school in Honey Harbor for the purpose of fire training, and also offset by savings in the clerk's budget for file storage.
Julie, do we get a definition of what falls under facilities specifically?
Yes, I could even name them off if you would like me to.
Please.
I would like to hear what they are and what's listed and what isn't listed, I guess is what I'm really asking. What are all our facilities versus what we're representing in this particular category?
The admin building, the Baxter Ward Community Center, the Brissett House, the Community Services Building, the Honey Harbor Road Decommissioned School, the MacTier Memorial Arena, the Port Seven Park Splash Pad Building, both shops, and I feel I'm missing one.
What about the building in Honey Harbor where the library is being, or
Libraries are separate.
sorry?
Park Landing building?
Oh, that's it. Yep.
What about other facilities like where the pickleball is and, sort of outdoor facilities? Where are they listed or accounted for?
They are accounted for under parks.
So we haven't done that yet.
Nope.
So Julie, what's the reduction in user fees and what accounts for that?
The user fee reduction is because we had overestimated for 2023.
Yet 2023, we're still looking at an actual that exceeds what we've budgeted for 2024.
Yes, and we have a special contract in a lease for the Baxter Ward that we might not be able to count on into 2024.
Ah.
And the utility increase is also related to now having the decommissioned school have have utility costs.
This is a decommissioned pool where?
The old Honey Harbor School. The old public school in Honey Harbor.
The old public school in Honey Harbor had a pool?
Yeah, and it has spa and
Where the hell was the pool? Excuse my language.
I think you misheard pool in school.
yeah, it was a school. The word was school, not pool.
Oh, thank God for that. Okay.
So Julie, what are all the uses of that school building at the current point in time?
Growing grass.
I will refer to Brad, our CEO.
Looks like I'm going. The school is currently essentially vacant. In very short order, it's going to be used for firefighter training, as well as for storage of records that are currently stored at an off-site location. They will now be moved to that school for storage.
So is there an opportunity for us to consider paving the grass or graveling the grass and making it into a paid parking facility and making it into a revenue generator?
Good thought.
I can't say no to that. The only, there is an area where the septic bed is, but other than that, there is an opportunity to do that.
So is a septic bed being used?
It will be.
Yes, who said that was correct.
Apparently, Councilor Garvis plans on using it.
No, the firefighting trainers, for crying out loud, they'll have to go pee sooner or later.
I heard rumors a year or two ago that it was not capable of being resurrected and would have had to been completely rebuilt for any substantial use. So I'm wondering if that is the case. Perhaps we could look into it.
We will look into it. I just checked with the chief building official and they indicated that they're not aware of that. If you have any other information, Councillor Hazelton, please send it on to us.
I have no information. This is rumors that I'd heard on the when we were talking about decommissioning it. People were talking about the building was condemned and this was condemned and blah blah. It was like a horror story beyond belief. I'm delighted that it's being able to be resurrected, but the messaging from a couple of years ago was it was a dead end and it was going to be extremely expensive to recover into any useful state. So if it is being used as or will be used as in a useful state, great. But I would also ask, given that the septic system isn't likely to cover the entire building, you know, there may be 5 or 10 parking slips there that we have no township parking in Honey Harbor as a hamlet. That would be a potential win.
I would second that, and to tell you the truth, if we decommissioned anything that was there, paved over it, made a parking lot, put some outhouses in for the firefighters to use when they're training, I think that would be a great use of the property and certainly would add some parking in Honey Harbor, because there's nothing when I go down and try and use the promenade, there's no place to park, and this would be great.
It's just my 2 cents here. You can't do that. There's a use to the building. You have to have a septic that meets Part 8. That's not an outhouse or a porta potty. You'd have to use the existing facilities that were there.
Building inspectors.
The question regarding this facility we're discussing, I'm not sure you want to answer this, Brad. It might be CAO Mariotti. When did these new uses of this building and area get approved by council? I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, so I believe I brought this up at one of my CAO updates to council 2 or 3 months ago. So it's part of actually trying to improve the efficiency of the training for the firefighters. So right now, what happens during training is that the equipment has to be pulled out of the of the existing public works bays. You know, the trucks, the materials for training, And then after the training's done, the trucks get put back in, and then all the materials get put away, and the crews basically do the training in the bays. So the fire chief and the fire team actually came up with a great suggestion. We have a building that is in pretty good shape as it is, and so for minimal cost to make it usable, the training equipment will now be housed at that location, and any fire training that takes place, the crews can all congregate there at one location and do the training with everything on site. And then you may not remember, Councillor Cooper, but this is kind of a first step and possibly an integral step as we go through the fire master plan, because we have that building in Honey Harbour, the current fire building in Honey Harbour, which is in very poor shape. And so as we look at that, one option could be to actually convert that, the old school into a new, more modern, upgraded fire hall that may actually include office space for fire staff.
Back to my question, when did council vote to approve this?
I can go back and look, Councillor Cooper, which month I brought this forward to council.
But we approved it, or you gave us a report?
No, I gave you an update report as to what we were doing with this facility.
Okay, so it wasn't approved by council. I just wanted to clarify that. It was an information piece. And I'm not against this necessarily, but I think this whole property needs to have a discussion with council to decide what uses are for today and what they may be in the future. Thank you. I'd like to see that happen. Can that happen, CAO?
Yeah, so as part of the fire master plan, if we do anything more significant than using it as a training location, we'll definitely obviously have to come back to council for those kind of capital costs.
Thank you. But what I'm asking is a discussion around the overall use of this property. You've identified one thing. I think we need to look at all sorts of uses. Could include parking. It could include a potential transfer station instead of the little weed thing we have on the Honey Harbour Road. There's a number of different things that may play into our solid waste issue in the future. So we need to think about those things. And so this sort of temporary use that you're talking about, I'm going to describe it as temporary because I still don't see that it's been approved by council. I think we need to examine this property and think about 2 years, 5 years out. So I'd like to see that come forward. Can you bring that forward, CAO?
Oh, absolutely. When the time comes to look at something a little bit more in depth, yeah, I mean, it's council's decision. In terms of the day-to-day operation, staff thought it was a good idea to centralize the training and make it more efficient for the department on a day-to-day administrative level. So that's why we made that change.
I'll look forward to seeing your bringing this forward. Thank you.
Any other comments on this facility schedule? All right, let's go on to the next page.
The next one is library facilities. This is, we treated it as we have on agreements with the board that are a little bit dated, but essentially they're cost neutral, where any work done is billable to the library board, and left it at that, even though there is a new contract in the works.
So Julie, if I may, what are your interpretations of the impact of that new MOU? in reference to financial costs, etc.
I haven't done any math on the new agreement at all so far.
Okay. Thank you.
The next section is parks. An overall $49,000 increase. Most of the decrease in the user fees and charges are due to the park and display that were moved to bylaw. And also we had a transfer from reserve in 2023 due to wharf assessments. So even though those aren't done to date, if they aren't going to get done in 2023, it will be in reserve carry forward, and we could draw from it when those get done.
Question for you, Julie. I'd be very interested, once again, I think it would be helpful for all of council, and maybe everybody else knows the answer to this, but I don't. And that is what makes up a park? What are the facilities? I'm assuming most of them are outdoor if it's a park, but where are the parks? What are the costs associated with each one of these? Does the system in Honey Harbor at the Delawana, the docks and so forth, the Honey Harbor honeypot or whatever it's called, but could you explain to me what's in this and what's not in here, or if everything's under this umbrella, it's sort of outdoor?
Yes, I could list them out. The Baxter Ward Outdoor Ice Rink, the Gibson Lake Boat Launch and Ball Field, and I could also list them in draft 2 in the detail here so that you guys have the list. The Honey Harbor Boat Launch, the Honey Harbor Park at 17 Blue Water Road, which it has been renamed, but I haven't changed the name in my system. The Honey Harbor Park Landing, not the building itself, but the park and docks. The MacTier Ballpark, the MacTier Welcome Park, which is a very tiny little piece of land that has our welcome sign. Miners Bay Boat Launch. Mississippi Park. The Port of Honey Harbor. Port Severn Park, not inclusive of the building. Regatta Beach, 6 Mile Lake, the tennis courts, 6 Mile Lake.
Whoa. What tennis courts?
Six Mile Lake?
Through them, Eric. Yeah.
Our director of operations getting all choked up thinking about it. His game hasn't been improving.
How dare
So
you?
am I. So am I. Carry on, please.
There's a tennis court located off of Berwick Lane. It's primarily used by people accessing it by boat, is what I'm told. That's the only tennis court we have.
And that is correct. So there is a large contingent of our community that uses it by boat, and hoping to also put a pickleball court there at some point in the future.
That's lovely, and I'm very excited about the prospect of having a tennis court in my community as well. I'm sure the township has got the money to do that.
Move a motion. Maybe we'll approve.
I might do so until sometime in the future. In the meantime, I'd like to see all these facilities listed. And frankly, at some point, if somebody in finance could assign costs associated with each one of these facilities on a sort of a ongoing basis, operational basis, that would be exceedingly helpful. We need to make sure that our constituents understand where all our facilities are and the costs associated with them. Thank you.
I'll just finish my list so nothing's left out and somebody says I've missed something. The 6 Mile Lake Vol Lake Boat Launch, 6 Mile Lake Water Access Property, Stewart Lake Beach, Kilty Bay Ramp. There is 12 Mile Bay Bloody Bay Docks, 12 Mile Docks further down the road in Wauwatosa Docks.
So Julie, you said the word Regatta Beach, or was that the Go Home Lake Regatta Beach?
Through the mayor, that's correct.
Thank you.
I'm just making myself a note to include the list.
Yeah, I
on
think
the
it'd be
next
very
one.
helpful, as you've already suggested, that you include a list of this in our second draft for our information. I think it's quite interesting because there are a lot of spots that Mr. Sokash has to make sure are in reasonable shape.
A map would probably.
Yeah, a map would be even better, or a great supplement.
That means I.
So I would like to, since we're on this topic, take the opportunity of thanking staff for the tour that we had earlier this year, because we got to visit many of these sites, clearly not the water access properties, but we got to tour and see some of the sites anyways. And that was very helpful, but I think a map with locations would be awesome.
And I might suggest a tour of these other facilities, the water access ones, next summer, so that we can see all these other things that are costing us a fair bit of money. Thank you.
So Councillor Predko, how many councillors can you put on your pontoon boat?
One. But many other people. I think we could round up the Cottage Association to help with boats to get people around the lake. I think they'd be more than happy to help facilitate that.
Julie, just a quick question here. It's Councillor Bochek. Yeah, my mic's on. With these facilities, like we have the Baxter Ward Community Center, but then we have the skating rink behind it, which is kind of a separate thing. And then we have the soccer field beside that and the baseball field. Baseball court, baseball field up on Haskett's Road. All of these would be included in the facilities individually, or are they grouped together?
So facilities have a specific criteria, so it really is a building that meets the criteria. I can't name the criteria offhand, but they undergo inspections that are different than parks. Everything, so for the Baxter Ward is a great example. We have that listed for the facility in facilities, and everything that's outdoors, the ice rink, the ballpark, etc. Those are also listed in parks as the Baxter Ward Park.
Great, thank you.
I'm gonna work my way back up. Little birdie told me that Jennifer is available to discuss the sustainability and food bank budgets.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. So just one clarification on this sustainability and communication. Does that include food bank?
No.
No. Okay. So could you just mention?
Yes,
All
we'll
right.
do both back to back.
So we're back on the sustainability communications page, and I believe we had a number of questions in that regard.
Okay.
So for the life of me, I can't remember what they were.
Well, I know one of them, Councillor Cooper asked what was contracted services, and I was thinking that it could be the first portion of the food bank, but if Julie says that's under a separate budget, then the few things that I know that are in contracted services without looking at the list would be town suites, which is it's like a community capacity builder. It was used recently on the purchase of the 25 acres across Christie Mill. It provides investors with information about the demographics, the work force, the average income, those types of items from the census. Council agreed to put that on into our website in 2022. So it is a contracted service for us as well. Julie, I'm not sure whether or not you can pull up the list of other items there. I heard you mention advertising, and that could be. We do use platforms like Hootsuite and also another platform called Canva, which is contracted services to be able to, we actually do the work. We're just paying for the platform. But Julie, do you want to look up the list and see what else was on that?
Yes, there is a general annual budget in advertising of 11.5, and I don't have a detailed list. It's just called annual budget 11.5.
Okay, so for the advertising budget, we do advertise in all the lake associations that we are able to access, and we tend to put full page ads in to show municipal support. It provides information that's relevant to the taxpayer about how to contact us, what kind of services are available, and of course, directs people to the website and our socials.
That there's another lump sum which was discussed on October 19th, and I believe the discussion went around that a lot of times we need to put up signs or things of that sort that are for the entire community, such as the new sign in the Port of Honey Harbor.
Well, that's true. We did recently purchase a 3-sided sign for the Port of Honey Harbor. There's a couple of more being purchased, one to go by Oak Bay Lookout, as well as the entrance feature of the Port of Honey Harbor. Those are about $5,000 to produce, but they're really great for us because not only can you repurpose the panels, but they're made with coated aluminum so they don't rust.
And also, from a finance perspective, there is a reallocation of insurance to the sustainability department as well. That is new this year.
So I have a question, if you don't mind. The contracted services and advertising. So you indicated it was to communicate the story of the township of Georgian Bay to the various communities. I'm assuming you're talking about the various cottage association brochure magazines, cottager. We call it the Cognizant Cottager, for example, in my area. Is that the kind of thing that you're talking about?
Yeah, yes, the Honey Harbor Hoots we advertise in. We do periodic advertising in the Gazette. I don't think that we've done anything in the Cognizant Cottage Association in a couple of years, but if you would like to have an ad in that magazine, just direct them to me.
Well, so it's the same publisher as I understand it at the same time. So I think if you go into one, you go into both. That's the way it used to work. It may not anymore, but I have another question. There used to be, going back a number of years ago, funding going to Sag Bay through advertising. Is that still happening?
Yeah, are we on the screen up at the Tim Hortons? Jennifer? Did we lose Jennifer?
We seem to have lost Jennifer.
So if we've lost Jennifer, maybe we can get a breakdown of the contracted services. I know that 1 year, going back several years ago, about $5,000 went to Sag Bay to their own marketing. And I'd like to know if that's still happening. That would concern me significantly. So
wasn't that just a $5,000 grant, Peter, or was that for marketing?
It was money that was the marketing account.
Yeah.
For the township was used several years ago.
Okay.
To support and sort of promote Sag Bay. And I just want to make sure that that isn't continuing. It's nothing wrong with Sag Bay at all, but it's a business marketing organization. It's not a community organization.
You must remember it, Stephen. There was 5 corrupt councillors that were taken to court at that time about funding Sag Bay. You must remember that.
Oh, no, I do remember that, but just clarification of what the money came from and what it was used for. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I remember.
On a previous topic, just an update for everybody. I've had Susan McGibbon help me confirm that if you advertise in Hoots, you're also getting into Cognizant Cottager, and vice versa. So it's as Councillor Cooper positioned it.
I think it would be good to have a breakdown, please, of this line item, just to help us understand what is being done today. Thank you.
All right. Given that we've seems to have lost Jennifer again, let's move back to where we were before on page. We were in public parks. I don't know if we'd finished the public parks conversation. Maybe we should go on to the next one.
The next
Line
one.
item 350.
The next one is taxation, and there's not significant changes. And then we're pretty much completed until we talk about salaries and benefits. So taxation, I do not have numbers for growth yet. And the capital levy increases included in line with the capital contribution that you saw in general governance. And we don't really change the property taxation general revenue until we're at a final number of what that increase will look like.
Okay, so that schedule is far from final. Okay, thank you.
So Julie, why would property taxation actual be exceed budget for 23?
Subs and omits. So we do budget for subs and omits, but sometimes we don't budget enough. And that would explain the difference in overall taxation.
Would that include like individuals whose assessment goes up because of development on the property?
Yes, it's building permit led. Yeah. Or also that, you know, we picked up on an assessment that was completely missed or something of that sort.
Thank you. You mean sort of like the guy that was 4 years behind in paying his taxes?
So we don't budget on a cash basis. It's not about collection. It's about actual levy for the year in hand. I'm gonna turn the column my colleague Ms. Seymour Buchanan and our CAO Mariotti to discuss the salaries and benefit changes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thanks, Julie. So for the staffing request for this year, I thought I'd do just a quick overview. So we're requesting 4 additional positions, 3 of which are summer students, plus looking to change a current municipal law enforcement officer into a supervisory position. So that's my very high level overview of that. Those positions are Finance is requesting a junior IT support position. So that is the 1 full-time permanent position, as well as 1 summer student. Operations is requesting 2 additional parks and roads laborers. So that would bring them from 2 summer students up to 4. And then, like I said, Fire and Emergency Services is looking to change one of their senior municipal law enforcement officer positions to a supervisor or chief of municipal law enforcement officers. So essentially that position would then have the other municipal law enforcement officers and the bylaw summer students report to them as opposed to reporting to the fire chief.
And that position you got not pre-approved because council's already approved that change.
Yes, so council approved a additional municipal law enforcement officer during the short-term talks. And then we were also removing one of their summer students. So the change is taking that position from a senior municipal law enforcement officer to a supervisor position.
Thank you.
We have one other position addition that's in the excuse me, library budget. I don't know if it should be included in this overall list for completion, or if that's because it's a separate budget, we don't discuss it in terms of HR.
Correct. We don't have authority on determining where the funding to the library is allocated.
Okay.
Councillor Bocek here, just wondering if, not today, but I would like to see somewhere down the road, our full-time employees has increased over my tenure here. I think when I started, there was 23. I think now there's 40 some odd. Obviously, because of council-driven things like adding bylaw departments and bylaw officers and everything else. Kind of what I would really like to see is our full-time population has maybe increased by 5%, but our full-time employees have increased by dramatically more. And I would like an explanation. If our population isn't growing and our revenue taxation is not growing, but our full-time employees have doubled over the last 10 years, I think probably there's, because I don't understand the reason why, there's a need to come back to council and give us an overview of why we're so top-heavy on staff when everything else hasn't expanded at the same rate.
Yeah, no, it's a very valid point, Councillor Bocek, and I think part of it is definitely, as we discussed at the beginning of the meeting here, is downloading from from the provincial government down to at the municipal level in terms of administering various activities, and I think, and I can go back through my notes at the last budget. I did a bit of an analysis, and we have increased by several people, but the majority of it is where the township used to have a lot more seasonal staff, and now we are converting those seasonal staff over to full-time. So if I recall, 5 or 10 years ago, there was like a dozen seasonal employees, and now those dozen seasonal employees have been converted over full-time, which is kind of a progression as well of a lot of the seasonal, certainly post-COVID, a lot of the seasonal homes and the use of these seasonal homes have been extended. So, which is also part of the reason why we're asking for some additional summer students, because it's maintaining that level of service and that expectation to have all those parks and facilities and whatnot, kept pristine for our ratepayers. And I just wanted to actually introduce something else that I don't know if council has been made aware of this before or not, but we don't really take into account the vacation that our staff has, and then of course we have to somehow backfill for that. If you take the operations department, for example, vacation alone is equivalent to almost 2,200 hours. And so that is the equivalent of 1.2 full-time employees of vacation that we have to cover. And of course, Mr. Sokash's staff in the wintertime, they can't really take vacation because they have to be out there plowing. So the staff, once the plowing is done, they will then try and take the vacation that they're entitled to during the warmer climates, which is why, again, we're asking for the seasonal summer students for Mr. Sokash. At a broader level, in terms of vacation, we have 6,200 hours that we're covering, and that's equivalent to 3.4 FTEs. And that's just vacation. It doesn't include training. It doesn't include banked time. For example, staff have banked 2,000 hours. That's 1 FTE. And it doesn't include training, sickness, and vacation. So the pressures are there. So in a manner, these are kind of hidden gaps that we're trying to fill, and we're doing that with some summer students.
I certainly appreciate that explanation, Greg, and thank you very much for it. I think as a council, we need to realize that we're driving these FTEs up. Council is the one that's doing it. When I came on council, we had zero bylaw, zero, not a single person. Now we have a staff of maybe 6. But it's all driven by council initiatives. We want short-term rentals taken care of. We want parking taken care of. That wasn't an issue when I came onto council. We continue to add things every year and continue to add employees every year to support the wants and the needs of this council. And I think we need to be aware and we need to understand that every time that we instill or put something new into place, the ramifications from that cost our taxpayers directly every month on their tax bill. And we need to slow down and we need to understand what is a necessity and what is a luxury. And we have far too much luxury in this township for the size we are. When you do a comparative study to other townships that have a full-time population similar to ours and a seasonal population similar to ours, and I will give you that comparison, Greg, we are far, far overstaffed than other municipalities at the same level. So, and I'm not saying it's our staff's fault. I totally believe it's council's fault, the direction we've taken this township in. So my 2 thoughts on that.
Craig, if I could just comment, please. Couple of things. You mentioned the vacations are needing to be covered now. They were also needed to be covered 10 years ago and 20 years ago. Nothing new. Our seasonal population is still 83%. Yes, some of our seasonal residents can access their properties in the off season, but a high number cannot and do not. So we have very much a seasonal responsibility in some ways. I'm also wondering about things like bank time. I understand that there's bank time with certain union negotiated arrangements, but I don't recall that we had bank time for the senior management level, but I assume that's in play now. I'm not aware that we have a contract to that effect, but we're doing that. Bank time is something that certainly in the rest of the world doesn't always happen. So it's worthy of at least noting. So, and you know, to blame it all on council, yes, maybe a little bit of that, but they're also downloading, but I think we need to also assess what is really required versus what is excessive. And so I think, for example, enforcement is worrisome, and hopefully with some efforts, especially on the planning side, to bring in some clearer direction through a new official plan and zoning bylaws, that we will follow the plans and then we won't have to enforce. That costs a lot of time and money to enforce on things that we shouldn't have approved in the first place. So there you go. My comments, and I think, yes, I recall the staff population full-time being 25. Now we're at 51. Thank you.
Greg, it's a good point that downloading has been an issue over by last few provincial governments, or even more than that. Is there any way we can correlate directly in a financial way what downloading has cost us? Sounds like a rather, maybe a difficult proposition, but I would be curious to know.
I can see if there have been any studies done.
Yeah, that might be something through AMO. I don't know. I just think it's
around for sure.
It's quite relevant. I mean, Councillor Cooper has just stated. I mean, we were the staff of 25 at one point, and now we're not. And yeah, Councillor Bocek is also right that it's initiatives from council in a lot of cases, but in other cases, probably many more. A lot of it's due to the fact that we've had to cover costs that we didn't have to cover before because the provincial government was doing it through their taxation, which they've obviously decided that we should be taken care of.
Yeah, I can definitely look at that, and I can try and resurrect the staffing numbers, the comparison between the total and the split between full-time and seasonal, and how that's changed.
I appreciate that, Greg. Thank you.
I think I'd like to make a couple of comments as well. I think that, yes, it's true that council has initiated some of these expenditures, often with the encouragement of some residents. I think, yes, it's true that some of it's due to downloading. I also think some of these costs are coming from the fact that we have a higher, not only do we have more people here, not huge numbers, but also more people here more days. And so there's a lot more, I dare call it interest in what the township's doing with people who are now spending, 6 to 8 months, as much time here as possible versus spending 2 months here. It's a different list of their requirements. We're also in a more litigious society, and I hate to put it this way, but staff is spending part of their time and effort covering our butts, not because we in the township are taking undue risk, but because that's the society we live in overall. I know she's only doing her job, but too often somebody like our clerk has to say, well, no, you can't do that because of this rule or that, because that's part of her job, sadly. So I think we have to take that all into account. But I also think what is, and I'm branching off on what Councillor Cooper was saying is in part of his comments. We are going to be provided, and I'm looking forward to a list of our facilities and our parks and whatnot, and all those are to provide services to our residents. And I think it's worth our while to consider that. And I'm not suggesting we just close 50% of it. Don't misunderstand me. But which of those investments are worthwhile, and which ones are, let me call it, nice to have as opposed to required? I think that's part of it, because much of the services that we provide, we really don't have a choice. I mean, the roads exist, they have to be served, for instance. They have to be serviced, they have to be plowed. I mean, I don't think we want to say to our residents, well, sorry, we're closing half our roads in the winter. I'm not sure that'll fly very well. But we may discover that we have some facilities that are barely used. Or maybe not, I don't know, but I think it's that's part of what we have to do, is look at the suite of services we provide to our residents, and which ones do we need to do, and is there a more efficient way of doing it, and which ones are nice to have, and maybe most of our residents would say, well, yeah, but they're not really worth it. And I think that's part of the challenge as we go through this budget, is the staff have made understandable recommendations as to where they think there should be an increase in staff to provide the services that they believe our residents are expecting from us. And it's up to us as council, having listened to our residents, to say, well, maybe a couple of those services we don't require. I mean, and if that's the case, that's a hard decision that we have to make. But I think that's part of what we have to consider, is of all the services we're providing, are there a couple of optional ones that maybe we won't provide in the future? That would be one way to cut the budget. In contrast, we know on a regular basis that many residents, via council, are asking for more services, and it's a tough balance. I mean, just like we have to do with our own personal household budgets. With everything, we have to decide, is it worth it or not? But those are some of my thoughts.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I agree with you 100%. And the service level that's expected today has changed from what it was. Well, I've been a full-time resident for 30 years at least. So we never had garbage pickup. You threw it in your truck and you went up to the transfer station and you dropped it off once every 2 weeks. But that's not the way people in this township today consider service. That's not what they consider to be a service. They want it picked up at their front door, their recycling, whatever else. So we need to look at who we are as an identity. We're a cottage community, and the services that we offer have to match the needs of our residents. And I think right now we're offering a lot of fluff instead of needed services. So you're right. Maybe a tennis court up on Hackett's Road is not something the township needs. Maybe that asset can be transferred over to somebody else, and the liability and the costs and everything else the ongoing costs can be transferred to that identity. So I think we need to look at asset allocation and a few other things as well too. And this list that's going to be coming, showing all our parks and all our amenities, maybe there'll be some opportunities there to get rid of some of the liability and long-term costs. So
I'm going to chime in, guys, if I can. Sorry to interrupt you, but there's two questions that I have. Councillor Bocek, on that point, if we're going to go through that exercise, you know, I have no objections to going through the exercise to determining what we can save on and at the same time what we can essentially download to others. And while we're looking at that, perhaps we can also look at how more effectively we can utilize the library board, or the library, because we do fund them to the tune of $350,000 a year. And are there additional services that they can offer that would free up resource hours or resource time from our team, thereby, you know, essentially putting money back into our coffers? If we're going to look at assets such as the 6 Mile Lake tennis courts, again, happy to consider that and review whether or not it's best suited to be outsourced to someone else. But I think then we should also look at all of the assets, including the pickleball courts in Honey Harbor, amongst others, and say to ourselves, you know, hey, if we're going to do that for one, we should do that for all. I have a question with regards to vacation, and this is directed at either our CAO Mariotti as well as Amy. Either one, feel free to answer. Do we currently have a policy that allows vacation carryover, or is it you must use it within the fiscal year that it's accrued?
Yes. So in the collective agreement, there's a clause in there that they've negotiated to be able to carry over 1 week of vacation to the following year. And then the non-union remuneration bylaw has the same.
So, and if I can, they can carry over 1 week year over year. So it is only a liability to us with respect to 1 week, or they can carry over 1 week and then the following year another week, and so they are banking 2 weeks now cumulatively for the 2 years, and then 3 for the third. So is there banking allowed, or is it just you can carry over 1 week, but then that following year you'll have to use 4 weeks rather than 3 if they were eligible for 3 as an example?
Yeah, you have to use it the following year. So each year you can only carry over 5 days total.
Okay, understood. So, and this is likely the reason why we don't show it as a liability on our spreadsheet here. Is that why? Because I'm curious to know what total outstanding vacation would cost us on carryover.
Do you know, Julie?
Because it's an accrual, it's expensed in the year it was earned. Therefore, our operating budget holds the vacation allowance for each employee in that year, and our balance sheet will hold the sum of what is owed to those employees. However, that amount is not huge because there's that limit of 5 days per employee.
Right, and which is what I suspected. Thank you for clarifying, guys.
And Amy, if I could just cover off one question, then another one will follow. But the first one is, there's 2 types of banking we're talking about here, though. There's a week banked from year to year, 1 week held over, but there's also banking time. Is that not correct, Amy? And who gets to bank time? All employees?
That's correct. So for the union staff, they are able to bank time, and then any time that isn't paid, or sorry, any time that isn't used is paid out on the first pay of the following year. So that's not carried over. It's either use it or it's paid out. Senior management team is able to bank time as well, but that time is not paid out. And then all other non-union staff are able to bank time, and it is paid out the same as the union collective.
So do we have a contract with our senior management team in a like an employment contract that says we allow time banking, and then allow them, we don't pay them at the end of the year, but we do give them bank time back. So it costs in a sense, especially if it's related to volunteerism. I wonder about that.
Yes, it's a non-union remuneration bylaw.
So we put it in place. We put it in place recently. Thank you.
Yes,
Or at some point in the last 10 years. I'd also like to comment that I'd like to thank the mayor and Councilors Bocek and Graziano for their comments. I think we do need to take a look at all our facilities and make sure that that we understand what all these things cost us and whether we can afford to do that in the future. I do know that we have, just on the tennis court issue, tennis courts around our township that are either private or in a club. Honey Harbor has a tennis court, but it's managed by a group in the Honey Harbor Association, a tennis club, so to speak, and they carry the costs. So I wonder about things like that. Why are we providing this service elsewhere? And I'm sure there's a group of tennis players in 6 Mile Lake that could manage this facility and maybe own it as well. So I think we need to look at those kinds of things, and maybe it goes back to a little bit more volunteerism as it relates to that kind of thing. And let's consider that. Thank you.
So if I may, yesterday we were talking about possible charges for parking, boat ramps, and other things. We didn't, I don't think, finish that conversation. Is that coming back to council for further discussion?
To the mayor, I'm afraid I only heard part of that, but if that's with respect to the paid parking, that is coming back in December.
Okay, but we also had on your list the topic of what do we do with boat ramps? Do we consider boat ramps as chargeable items? That was another line item in that overall report. So is that also coming back for further discussion?
Through the mayor, I believe that council resolved on that to leave things the way they were.
I don't think we took any votes on that yesterday.
I think the conversation went that it would be very complicated, short of installing gates to somehow control people using the boat launch, but we'd want to make sure that boat trailers are charged a parking fee as a partial way of addressing that.
Yeah, if I could chime in and maybe help with this, because I was involved in it with Brad originally, that we came up with the free parking pass for the residents so they could use the asset that they paid for, which is the park. And then for outsiders, it was $20 to park their car there for the day, which is metered. But a car with a trailer, I believe we charge $60, which is the parking for your trailer, the parking for your truck, and the launching fee in and out was kind of factored into that high fee for the truck and trailer. So it's not a perfect system. It could probably be reanalyzed and rethought out, but we know for a fact that the one example, which is the Port Severn Park parking lot, Brad, you could probably chime in on this, but probably brought in $50,000 worth of revenue last year.
25, but yes.
25? So 25,000 in revenue, plus our residents were able to use the facility without paying. That's a pretty good return on investment. So if we could carry that over to other parking lots in other locations, I think we might have something there. But the discussion coming back in December is going to be a very, very critical one. And I think this council needs to decide where we're going with parking, because it is a control method and a revenue generator.
So in fairness,
I'm going to chime in. Sorry, I'm going to chime in there. Sorry, Councillor Hazelton, if I can. And given that we've heard that new technologies will allow staff to not even require a meter, rather they can do it digitally through an app on your iPhone or your Android device, is incredible, because we're not incurring such a heavy cost. We also understood that there are ways in which to have dual paved and gravel parking spots and still apply fees to it? Because again, I remind everyone that we have a parking spot, an open spot just east of the 400 off of Crooked Bay that all of the day trippers that are visiting the lake west of the 400 use, and we could be making a fortune on long weekends for those parking locations. So I can't imagine why we are not investigating this as serious revenue options going forward.
If I could jump in here. Earlier in this financial conversation, we agreed that we would get the full package of information about the Port Severn Park, because there are accruals that are taking place on that park that may cause us to conclude things differently about the value of that park to our community from a financial standpoint. That's not suggesting we want to not do it, but that's one thing to consider. And then when it comes to boat launches, I'm guessing that there are some boat launch ramps that are municipally owned today that the neighboring marina may be interested in having a financial revenue stream to manage it on our behalf. So, for example, you've got a ramp. Certainly, I can assure you that in Honey Harbor, all of the marinas have their own ramps, and they're not particularly pleased with the free ramp that is in Honey Harbor. They would all like to have people have to pay for that ramp so that there's a competitive balancing off, if you will. And the marina that is immediately beside the ramp, I'm sure would be interested in a revenue stream for kind of essentially managing that ramp. They're already involved in providing feedback to Brad on the status of the gravel and the use of that ramp. Yeah, I see Brad smiling away there. So, so they're already actively involved. They're getting paid nothing for it. The marinas aren't particularly thrilled with the freebie. And in the world of our cottage country, nothing is free. So I think that we have an opportunity, somewhat as Councillor Graziano has suggested, there are lots of opportunities to potentially generate revenue, either for parking, for boat launches, etc. And I think we want to put our creative hats on and start thinking about how we go about leveling the playing field here. Thank you.
I think you mentioned leveling the playing field, but I also think about leveling our budget. And if we, one way of, I mean, we can cut expenses, but we could also try to increase revenues if we determine that the services that we're providing are services that a portion of our residents appreciate and are, shall we say, willing to pay for. So I do think that looking at our revenue is as important as looking at our expenses as we try to determine our budget. And so I'm looking forward to the December report on parking and boat launches, and hopefully we can take that discussion to make a decision or two as how to best move forward for the benefit of all our residents. All right. Any other?
Mr. Mayor, I just would like to say that there may be other opportunities beside boat launches and parking, including maybe a fee for tennis. So there's lots of different places where we might be able to do some recovery. Thank you.
I think somebody, I forgot which councillor it was keen on toll roads. Or maybe it was just my imagination.
You're imagining things.
Okay.
I think that came out of Ward 2, if you really want to know.
Would they be applied on district roads?
Well, that'd be interesting. Could we set up tolls on district roads for our coffers? I'm not sure that it would work, but it would be a great idea, wouldn't it?
Perhaps what you want to do is
Theo Mariotti wants to shut me down now, I think.
You want to put a toll on the main drag of in Honey Harbor there, the slow zone, and just capture every boat as they go by.
Or what about on the 400? There we'd have a revenue generator.
Perfect.
Theo Mariotti, please change the topic.
This is kind of an off-the-cuff suggestion, but I wonder if for some time next month, and the clerk is probably looking at me thinking, what is he going to come up with now? I wonder if we have time in December to maybe have a brainstorming council and staff meeting whereby we have a list of all our facilities and assets with as much cost as we can gather. We probably won't have enough time to get the totality of it, but I'm sure with Mr. Sokash and maybe with our supervisor as well, Mr. Taylor, who can give council an idea as to how much staff time it takes for each location, for example, and then we can have more of an informed brainstorming together, a discussion as to if we want to, maintain that level of service or modify it.
I personally think that's an excellent discussion, a suggestion for discussion. Let's look at that list of a dozen facilities and 20 parks or whatever the numbers are, and make some general comments. And it would be great to be informed by Ms. Boutiette and Mr. Sokash as to rough ideas as to how much of a pain they are to maintain or not. I mean, if there's something we're providing and actually costs us next to nothing, we might just say, okay, fine. But I think that would be a very good discussion to have.
Quick question off topic here. Have we made a decision on council meeting this January? I don't know we've had a final decision from staff yet.
I believe you lost connectivity yesterday when we addressed that. So we have we have two, it did get approved. There
in
are
Arizona.
Yeah. There are two tentative dates for council scheduled in January that are allocated for budget, but there will not be a regular planning council cow in January.
Okay, thank you. I did miss that yesterday.
All right, Ms. Boutiette, is there anything more that you want to add to the conversation at this point? I mean, as of now, we've made the budget worse, but I think the one thing that we have not asked, but we're going to ask, at least I'm going to ask, is if you're stuck, given that we would rather have the budget looking more with a lower increase versus a higher increase that we're now just throwing at you, what staff suggestions might be as to places that we could consider cutting, as much as it may make you cringe. If you'd rather have us cut here versus there, or here are the options, I think you've done that in the prior years, and I think that would be appreciated. Because that's the one side, and then the other side, I think would also be appreciated, is where staff thinks that we might want to consider revenue sources, and that might be part of our overall general discussion. Because what I think would be good for us is sometime in December to get together for a half-day session where we banter back and forth about our facilities, our parks, what have you, and maybe that will lead to a change to our budget now, or maybe it'll lead to a project to do a little bit more research. But I also think we would appreciate, as you've done in the past, a listing of, well, you could cut here, or you could, what would it take to have an increase of 5% versus what is it? What are we going to be up to now? 12% or something if we put all these extras in? I haven't done that math, but I think council would find that quite useful.
Mayor, if I can make a recommendation on the getting together for a special meeting to determine revenue options, perhaps that can be done on one of the overnight stays that we had discussed, whereby we all sit down over a dinner and hash that out, and that would be the topic of the evening. Just a thought.
I'm a little concerned about that, simply because I think this discussion should be done where the public can view it and
fair enough,
respond to it. All right. I'm not seeing anything. I'm wondering if we've had enough discussion for now on the budget. I know there'll be more to follow. Ms. Boutiette, are you grimacing or are you going, let's, you got work to do?
No, I fear the other way. Our total facility budget is 300,000. Our total parks budget is around 200,000. We could hash that out to make them revenue neutral if we try. Even at that, you're not getting it. Like, even if both of those things were hashed out and we got it all figured out, it's not a significant impact. I'm feeling like I'm going away with not enough. We've in a matter of hours we've increased 121,000, and we're thinking of, you know, plucking out of facilities and parks unless there's a, you know, a big huge decision, which can't happen over a budgeting period. It has to happen over a year. No decision, like, I don't think council's in any position to be doing those big decisions on the fly for budgetary purposes.
No, but I still think I think it's a conversation worthwhile, and I'd like to suggest that on top of the operating costs, there's also capital costs in connected with those locations that would also be part of our deliberations. In other words, I'll use an example. If we have a boat launch, at some point that requires repair and or replacement, or the facility may require refencing or repaving or this or that. So I think part of our discussion won't be just how do we get a better budget for 2024, but I think it's a long-term discussion as well. And I think that's important for us to have.
And coming from a non-financial end of things, Julie, Councillor Bocek here, you've given us a lot to digest, and we are going to go away and we're going to sit down in a quiet area and try and digest all this. But because of what you've done today, it gives us reason to say, okay, yesterday we were making decisions about paying for hotel rooms and paying for meals and overnight stays and counselor benefits and that. But when you look at the picture you presented today, it maybe makes us look at things a little differently and saying, we need to control spending and we need to stop this frivolous spending. And so today was a great learning day for someone like me. And the takeaway from this is to now go study it and find out ways that we can stop wasting money and start using the money correctly. So that's from a non-financial point of view, from a guy who's been in business all his life and understands profit margins, and that's about it. So thank you for today, and I'm certainly going to go away and do hours and hours of reading on this. Appreciate it.
I could just jump in behind Councillor Bocek. I believe, I'm not sure that Mayor was going in this direction, but I think he was, that we shouldn't just be looking at what I'll call Parks and Recreation. Is that a TV show? But I think rather than just Parks and Recreation, I think what he was also suggesting is maybe staff can take a look at their departments and see if there's some other potentially low-hanging fruit that we could be looking at. It wouldn't have anything to do with Parks and Recreation, so to speak. So is that fair enough, Mayor? Were you not looking for more than just this?
Yes, but I also think that not just low-hanging fruit in my mind, but also, you know, what if we all of a sudden stop doing a particular service? Now, I'm not suggesting that I want to see township at half of what it does now, because I think the consequences for our residents would be rather dramatic. But at the same time, you know, I think it's an example. You know, Parks and Recreation is one example of where we can look at where we may not want to provide the same level of services 2, 3, 5 years from now. I'm going to go to Councillor Predko and then Councillor Hazelton, please.
Thanks. So I wanted to add on to the mayor's request. I think in terms of staff suggestions, it would be very helpful to have more of a detailed overview and justification for the additional positions that you have in terms of understanding what work currently isn't being done without those positions and what program is being tied specifically to that ask, so that we're able to really understand, the implications of not having the staff, or both in the positive or the positive of having that staff, and will that improve the delivery and the streamlining of our operation. We also didn't discuss the food bank. I know Ms. Schneier's back online again. I don't know if we want to go back to that section, but the one other comment that I can see her going mute, on, off mute, on mute. Going back to council expenses, and I know we've all agreed that having council get together in the winter months for some overnight to alleviate the travel issues and to have an opportunity to speak to one another. I think we need to look at the size of that expense, especially when you consider all the other things that have been increasing on the budget. But I think it's valuable. I think we just need to be cognizant of the message and the optics of what we're proposing.
All right, thank you. Councillor Hazelton, please, followed by Councillor Jarvis.
Thank you. Julie, could you give us an idea of the timeline when you need to get the budget approved?
The sooner the better. It would be best to have it approved before the new year starts. However, there's no legislative guideline on when a budget needs to be approved, and there has been some history of budgets being approved in the fall, all the way to the fall of the year in which the budget is for, where you pretty much have actuals by that point.
So my concern here is there are likely programs within the township that require knowledge of a confirmed budget before you can go ahead and either hire people or embark on new commitments. We clearly have that issue with the library. Knowledge of certainty early in the year is really important to enable us to approve programs that we've already spec'd out, and they're basically ready just to push the go button. So that's important. But shifting back to just things from a general perspective, we're talking, based on entering this budget discussion, at a likely 6.5% increase. When we look at the township increases, the district increases, and hopefully a zero education increase. Given little things like that commercial, not non-residential construction increase of over 8%. And we look at all of the other things that are crazy in society today. It is not scary for me at all to push that number from, call it 6.5% to 7%, 7.5%. We are living in a current climate of we expect things are going to continue to go vertical in additional costs from a percentage standpoint. I'm not a big fan of it, but in fairness to some of the conversations we were having before, councillors come to council reflecting residents' demands on this, that, and the other thing. And we are championing those demands, and those demands don't come for free. And I would say that the demographic that we are dealing with here are not, if the demographic are demanding all of these things, we know they can afford it. So to me says, as long as we're not ridiculous, having overall blended increases of 6-7%, maybe even 8%, isn't really that scary if it's going to deliver the quality of services that our residents are demanding. That's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis, please.
Yeah, and that was saying I'd rather see a budget that reflects a sort of an inflationary increase as opposed to anything exceeding that. But I know that I agree that there are demands being put on us by our constituents that require an increase in what it costs to provide them. That's something they got to deal with. Having said that, I'm always big on leading by example, and I know it's only a drop in the bucket, but council expenses and council remuneration is something we should also be considering in this discussion. And I know that certain things were probably approved yesterday. I wasn't there at the meeting. I'm not too keen on spending additional monies on council than what's already being spent. And I'd also like us to consider perhaps reducing what we would be getting as part of an increase in our salaries by way of showing by example that we are prepared to tighten our belts as well. That's just a comment on my part.
Thank you. Councillor Graziano.
Thank you. I'm a big Warren Buffett kind of fan. And he's got an interesting statement that I think is very applicable here. He says during economic hardships, by removing insignificant line items like Netflix or your groceries, you're not necessarily going to be saving that much. He said, when constrained financially, earn more income. And I believe that's very fitting for our current situation. We have only two ways to earn more income. That is through taxation or user fees. And I don't want to tax our constituents more. I think our constituents would be far more understanding if they had to pay a user fee if in the event that they were going to use one of our assets and or one of our facilities versus versus having to pay a tax. So I'm just looking at the calendar right now, and I see that we have another tentative budget meeting scheduled for 2 weeks from now. Assuming that we are going to hold that budget meeting, I'm not sure. I wonder whether or not in between that, council can come together to look at ways at generating more income. And I have a second question, if I can. Julie, I'm sorry, I was driving for the most part of this conversation with personal obligations. What is the loss that we have forecasted this year for the MacTier Arena, out of curiosity? I'm sorry.
I did not discuss that, and I don't have that number available and ready for you today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I would advise that council should not be gathering in majority with quorum to discuss the budget, because that would be advancing the business. So if we're going to do, it needs to be within a proper council meeting.
To clarify, Karen, that's what I was suggesting was a proper council meeting.
Before the 29th?
Before the 29th. So sometime next week, one gets scheduled where we can actually come together and discuss revenue streams and look at creative ways on how we can increase our income revenue or our user fee revenue.
And next week is district week.
Yeah.
For 3 of us.
Okay.
I can definitely do another one in December. I've already reached out to the district to confirm their schedule for December. But next week would be very difficult to find a time that would work.
Fair enough. Then perhaps we push into December. It's just a suggestion as this could be something that we can really hash out in advance of Julie returning back with an updated budget.
Okay. Thank you.
CEO Mariotti.
Thank you, Mekutia. I may have misunderstood, but Ms. Bouthelette, for this first draft, we don't have our projected assessment growth in here, do we?
No.
The percentage, okay, because that could be also a bit of a bonus. For at the district, they've come up with 1.5%. So, you know, assuming if we were to come up with, assuming that number maybe for our brainstorming session, that will kind of help things. But the good news is that our first draft is actually less than what our final budget was last year. So that's not a bad accomplishment. So.
And I think if I could just follow up that before going to Councillors Bochek and Cooper, is you know, as following up on what Councillor Hazelton's comments, I think, you know, the sooner we can settle on a number, the better, obviously, not only for those who have to plan their budgets for the coming year, but also because we have to set a tax rate. And, you know, March is when that tax bill goes out, and I don't think we wanted to set that rate, or still going to be based on the prior one, but it'd be good to let people know what's coming. And I think, so we should strive to get this budget done as quickly as possible, even if we don't have it done by December 31st, because I say everybody's got to plan their budgets and start hiring tons of people, or not. Anyway, with that, Councillor Bochek.
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, listening to the comments from Councillor Hazelton and some of the other seasonal residents and seasonal councillors, I tend to agree with their thought, but I want them to always remember that there's a demographic here in this township, which I represent the minority of them, that families live in shanties and they work for minimum wage and they try to pay their taxes and they try to live and send their kids to school and everything else. We're talking about my people, the people that live here permanently, that don't have second income, second cottages, second homes, things like that. And we need to always consider them when we're making any budgetary considerations. Yes, it's fine that we have a lot of wealthy seasonal residents here that can afford to pay a lot of these things. But there's a lot of people here that pay their property taxes that don't have the extra money to pay for these things. And we need to consider them too. They're a very, very important part of our demographic. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Yes, and I'd like to thank Councillor Bochek for his comments, and yes, there are certainly a number of people that would find an increase difficult. And there are others that may not find it as difficult, but may feel just as difficult about it, because if you think about the services in my community out on the water access world, not a lot has changed in terms of services over the last 30 years. And what I mean by that is solid waste, solid waste, solid waste. If you're building something, yes, more complicated planning, but many people aren't building anything and haven't for years. So a large percentage of the population, the one service they get is solid waste. And so even if they can afford to pay more, their taxes may have already, in the last 20 years, more than doubled. I know mine have. So I think we need to remember that too. We want to provide sort of an equitable service to our community. I wanted to also talk about the comments of council and sort of council not adding to the expenses, and I understand that, and I think we have to weigh that, and maybe that can be part of our discussion when we meet again. I think there's benefits, cost benefits, and there's also a message that we need to be careful to be sending. Having said that, whereas we may not want to add to expenses, I will say this, that one of the things that might be equitable is to make sure that our councillors who travel long distances are not compensated for any of their expenses for that long distance. Unlike you, Councillor Bochek, you're 2 minutes away, and that's lovely, but we have never taken that head on and dealt with it. And I think it's worthy of at least consideration. So while council should lead by example, we should try and be fair. And right now you get paid when you hit the border of the township of Georgian Bay, or in the case of the District of Muskoka, you get paid when you hit the borders of the District of Muskoka, which can be one and the same. So I think that's worth consideration. Fairness is fairness. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hazelton.
Thank you. I have a couple of points that I'd just like to toss out here. Number one, by way of example, I had someone reach out to me and show interest in becoming a counselor. Almost the first thing that he said to me is there some way to boost up the pay that you get? Because this is a volunteer job and nobody, unless you're well, not self-employed, you're independently wealthy or something like that, nobody can afford to do the job. Certainly, unless you're gray hair and you're retired and you have this time available, or no hair, you can't afford to do the job. And so I strongly object to any concept of reducing the income structure for counselors, not because I need the money, it's because we want to find a way to foster and grow the pool of people that might want to step up and represent their communities. And we will never get there if we don't start recognizing that the remuneration is a joke and the lack of cost recovery is a joke. Having said that, I wanted to transition my talks to a question here for Julie. Julie, is there a way to have a phased mill rate structure? So, for example, if I have properties assessed at 300,000 or less, they get a break on the mill rate. 300 to a million, they have another mill rate, and a million and more, do they have a different mill rate? In other words, is there a way to address what Councillor Bocek was getting at through a mill rate, a phased or stair-step mill rate structure?
No.
Thank you. Wrong answer.
It's not how the property tax in Ontario was designed. It's assessment based and it's in a residential class. And if you're in that class that's put forward by MPAC, that the mill rate applies to that. There's no discretion on pooling it any further.
Well, you know what I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to solve that problem that Councillor Bocek brings up, and I don't know how else to do it. But I just thought that.
Yeah, it is a problem because you have a house that somebody paid. I'll give you an example. I'll give you my example. Say I'm a low income earner, which I'm not, but I paid $129,000 for my house 15 years ago. It's now a $1.1 million house. And I'm being taxed on that as a $1.1 million house, even though I only paid $130,000 for it. And if I'm that guy who's working at the general store and my wife is working at a marina to support our family, we could afford the taxes on that $129,000 house, but we can't afford the taxes on a $1.1 million house. And that's what Council Hazelton was getting to. They almost need a tiered mill rate. So inflation isn't something we had a choice of. I don't want my house to be worth 1.1 million. I want it to be worth 150,000 and pay the taxes on that. But it's not a perfect world. And I seen where Alan was getting. I'm not going to let that go. There has to be something. We probably can't do something, but at the provincial level, maybe there's something that can be done one day, because it's becoming a very unfair taxation system for most people.
Market value reassessment has been the killer.
Yes.
That's the problem, and it's a provincial model, and it's broken, and they don't get it.
All right, I think we're really drifting off if we're going to get into the province, because I know if I start talking on that subject, it'll get, I'll go hungry for lunch. Councilor Graziano, is that a recent hand?
The recent hand, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. It is a recent hand. I have a question in regards to and perhaps it's silly, but there is precedent set here. In regards to Councillor Bocek's concern, which I echo, I agree. I support a ward that does have families that are not necessarily can afford fees and or a high tax increase. The federal government just allocated benefits, albeit perhaps for short term, to Atlantic Canada when it pertains to the use of oil. And I wonder whether or not we can in some way, shape or form subsidize our permanent residency versus our seasonal. Now, I understand that that would very much create two classes of citizens or residents, and I don't want to do that, but I'm wondering if there's a way that we can look at ensuring that the families that may not necessarily be able to afford user fees can still use our facilities, our assets, while those that can do. I'm not sure if that's a possibility, but perhaps that's something that we should noodle on and come back to. Thank you.
I think that is something that should be part of our discussion when we get into a future meeting when we're talking about revenues and the use of facilities or staff services and all that sort of thing. I'm going to suggest that we shut the conversation down for now. I think we've had good discussion. I think we've given some information and some interest, some homework, if you will, to Ms. Boutiette. And I also think we've agreed that once we have a list of the parks and facilities, for example, that will lead us to having a discussion on the value of those facilities to our, I'm using the word facilities very broadly, the value of our facilities and services to our residents and which ones are worth it to them and which ones may not be, and possible user fees. But I'm just going to, I'm going to suggest, instead of going through listing off the various things we've specifically said, I think I'm just going to say, moved by Councillor Predko, seconded by Councillor Hazelton, whereas council has received the information and discussion in relation to no, this is the wrong word. That doesn't make any sense. Be it resolved that council receive the information and discussion in relation to the 2024 budget draft number 1. All those in favor? All right, I think we've all agreed. We've received and discussed. Moved by Councillor Hazelton, second by Councillor Cooper. Be it resolved that Council adopts bylaw 2023-109. Oh, 107. Things changed on the fly. We just saved 2 points. To confirm the proceedings of the November 15th, 2023 council meeting. All those in favor? And that is carried. And be it resolved the council does now adjourn at 12:54 until November 29th, 2023, 9 a.m. to start, which is exactly 2 weeks from now, to continue our budget discussions, or at the call of the chair. Councillor Hazelton?
So Councillor Graziano introduced an idea of some less formal but useful discussion prior to that next meeting. I'm wondering what opportunities or appetite we have for that.
We have no appetite for it, in that as a council, if we're meeting, we have to meet in public.
I'm not suggesting a
one or
private.
two councillors, if one or two councillors want to talk amongst themselves, that's their business.
If I may, I'm currently working on finding another date sometime between now and the end of the year, or two, like literally as we're talking. But it's not an easy thing picking another date.
Ms. Boutiette.
I believe we could use the session of the 29th to bring forward all the information requested on different facilities, parks, and also do a piece about revenue brainstorming.
Yes. Yeah, no, I think I'm hoping that November 29th will be a good open discussion. If any couple of councillors want to discuss amongst themselves ideas, I don't have an issue with that. I do have an issue if 4 councillors or more are in the discussion and it's not in public, because I think that's unfair to our residents and against the law. All right. Moved by Councillor Cooper, seconded by Councillor Jarvis. Be it resolved, the council now adjourn at 12:56, having had all our phones and everything else give us emergency alerts until November 29th, 2023 at 9 a.m. or at the call of the chair. All those in favor? And that's enough hands to say carried. And thank you very much for this discussion. We'll continue it in 2 weeks' time, and good luck getting